This page is the front cover of N64 Magazine, issue 40, from April 2000. Right in your face is a big N64 logo, you can't miss that. It's boasting about being the UK's best-selling independent N64 mag, and promising more games, pages and tips. There's a cartoon globe playing an N64 controller, typical magazine fluff. Déjà. The big headline is about Nintendo's Dolphin developers speaking inside. That's the code name for the GameCube, of course. Hype was real back then for the next Nintendo console, wasn't it? They're also giving away a free double-sided Perfect Dark and Pokemon poster. Gotta love a freebie. Warrington Norcus. The main game being pushed is Ridge Racer 64, splashed across the cover as reviewed inside, and claiming to be the best racer you'll ever play. Bold statement, especially with F-Zero X and Mario Kart 64 already out. Still, Ridge Racer was always a solid arcade racer, and on the N64, it was a decent addition to the library. Other games mentioned are Perfect Dark, with staggering new multiplayer info. Perfect Dark was the spiritual successor to GoldenEye 007, and everyone was desperate for any news on that. Turok 3, Oblivion gets a shout-out with awesome weaponry revealed. Turok was always about the guns, wasn't it? ECW Hardcore is tipped, with moves and tactics. That was the wrestling game on the N64. Bit of a niche title compared to WWF No Mercy. Toy Story 2 is also there with a secret SPAC'd first guide. Kids love Toy Story, guaranteed sales there. Down the bottom there's a plus, Planet Game Boy section, meaning there's a Game Boy mag inside as well, bonus for your pocket money, and a look section telling you to flip up your free double game guide. More free stuff. Classic magazine cover really, trying to cram everything in to tempt you to buy it. Issue 40, April 2000, and it cost £3.25. Those were the days. This page is the contents page for issue 40 of the magazine from April 2000. Right at the top, it's clearly laid out what's inside. The editor, Tim Weaver, is banging on about Ridge Racer 64 in his letter. Seems he initially thought it was rubbish, but then he played it and now reckons it's brilliant, and even managed to complete a novice course in under a minute 19, which he seems quite chuffed about. He's recommending everyone check out his review, on page 50. Looking at the contents themselves, section 10 is News Desk, covering the latest on the Game Boy Advance, which was a big deal back then. Everyone was waiting for that. Section 16 is Coming Soon, teasing the lush-looking SR3K, plus Daikatana, Zelda and Aiden. Daikatana was always hyped but never really lived up to it, did it? Zelda, that would be Majora's Mask coming up soon then. Always good. Aiden, can't say I remember that one too well. Okay. There's a section for regulars, covering directory, subscriptions, and next issue info. Standard magazine stuff. Then a Planet Game Boy section, dedicated to Game Boy games. Jory de Laura. Then we get into the game reviews. Page 50 is Ridge Racer 64, as mentioned by Tim. Page 58 is Battlezone, a first-person space shooter, probably another one trying to ride the wave of console FPS games at the time. Page 62 is Battle Tanks 2, multiplayer tank battling. Those games were always a laugh with mates. Page 64 is Tarzan, described as a rancid platform yawnfest. Bit harsh, but maybe it was that bad. Page 66 is Cyber Tiger, a Tiger-licensed Mario Golf-alike. Always seemed a bit of a cheap knockoff, those Tiger games. Page 69 is Supercross 2000, mud-spattering biking action. Might have been decent enough. And finally, page 70 is Vigilante 8-2, asking if it's second offense or second offensive, a bit of wordplay there. So, overall, a standard contents page, highlighting the key sections and game reviews in the magazine. Ridge Racer 64 seems to be the main feature, and the Game Boy Advance news was definitely something everyone was interested in at the time. The next page is the contents page for N64 Magazine, April 2000 issue. Right at the top it's shouting Future Look, which promises a first glimpse at the big new N64 games, apparently starting on page 6. We've got Turok 3 featured, claiming latest pics and info on the weapons. That's on page 8. And then International Track and Field 2000 getting a look in too, saying unmissable first picks on page 9, although I'm not sure how many of us were exactly clamoring for more track and field, to be honest. The key. Down the side, it's listing all the regular sections. N64 Club 64, the reader service bit. Then the how-to guides, looks like they're covering power slamming in ECW Hardcore Revolution on page 78, becoming Top Banana in Donkey Kong 64 on 82, and getting started in Toy Story 2 on page 84. Bit of a mixed bag there. The main feature seems to be the Dolphin Jigsaw, a special investigation on page 28. It says developers are speaking and they've uncovered Dolphin Buzz, which of course is what we all knew the GameCube as back then, and they're talking to the people behind the machine, which sounds intriguing. Below that is Disco Tech, all about the 64DD on page 44, saying they're giving Ninty's drive a good going over, which could be interesting or just a bit dull, depending on how much you cared about the 64DD, which wasn't much for most of us in the UK as it never actually came out here. Then there's movies, games and videos digging into those shameful TV game shows on page 116. And the usual reader stuff like Club 64 mailbox for questions on page 74, tips extra with Dr. Kit's game clinic for GoldenEye cheats, and general help on pages 88 and 93. Game on I'm the best for reader challenges on page 96. Skill Club 64 feat with new challenges for the Millennium on page 100, the directory for missed reviews on 104, and back issues and subscriptions on page 114 to get old mags and subscribe. So yeah, a pretty standard issue shaping up for April 2000. This page is all about a future look at what's coming to the N64. Seems like they're showing off some of the big new games we were all waiting for. First up, Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. It's got a big splash with new shots of Acclaim's latest Dino Blaster. Looks pretty good, to be fair, showcasing some of the environments and those rather gruesome looking enemies Turok games were known for. There's a section called Info Burst, giving us the nitty gritty. Acclaim are the developers. It's a 256 megabit cart for 1 to 4 players and uses all the packs controller, expansion and rumble, but no transfer pack. It was slated for October, with a TBA for Japan, and they've given it a full 5 red blobs for anticipation. So they were clearly expecting big things. There are some captions next to the screenshots. Typical magazine commentary. One mentions a nice-looking temple area and wonders if it's a return to the lost land, and another notes a SWAT team assault in the city level. Another one is pointing out a monster's chin, joking about shooting it, and another comments on a level hub looking like the first Turok. They're saying the environments are smashing, detailed, colourful and simply ace, and wondering if the big beasts are related to the Perlin from Turok. Too bit of a deep-cut reference there, for those who remember those annoying cat creatures. Then there's International Track and Field 2000. First play of Konami's Olympic button basher, it says. Track and field games, eh? Always a laugh with mates, hammering those buttons to try and beat each other at the 100 meters. It got an 8 out of 10, so they must have liked that one too. And right at the bottom it says, want more new games? Check out the coming soon section of Planet 64, on page 16. Just letting you know where to find more previews, I suppose. All in all, a pretty standard look at upcoming titles. Turok 3 was definitely the main attraction though, dinosaurs still had a good pull back then. This page is all about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, which they've cleverly called Shadow of Oblivion, OK3. It's a future look piece, so they're giving us the early word on it. They reckon Turok 2 was a big step up for the N64, even if some people were a bit sniffy about it. Personally, I thought Turok 2 was alright, a bit choppy in places maybe, but it looked the part. Anyway, they're saying Turok 3 is listening to all the criticisms of Turok 2, especially the multiplayer, which, let's be honest, wasn't perfect dark. So they're promising a wholesale improvement to the single player, and even though it's early days, they reckon it's already got a lot of potential. One of the big whinges about Turok 2 was the lack of save points. Well, they've sorted that out apparently. You can save anywhere now, and there's even an autosave feature. Good move that. Nobody wants to replay massive levels again and again. They're also saying the levels are going to be smaller, with 20 in total spread across 5 different environments, from futuristic cities to more jungly outdoor bits, like the first game. They seem to think it'll run smoother in highs this time around, even in combat. Fingers crossed on that one. We're getting 24 new weapons, apparently, all designed to be proper over-the-top death dealers. They mention the Eviscerator as one of the new ones, which sounds charming. Judging by the names of some of the others, like body-obliterating disembowelment rifle, they're not messing about. We're getting the Tech crossbow and Inferno cannon back too, which is good to hear. Weapons will be upgradable as you go, so they get more destructive, which is always fun. Heya. In terms of enemies, there are over 40 different types, and you can even play as 2 different characters, which is a bit different. They're banging on about the multiplayer mode having over 48 arenas as well, so they're clearly pushing that side of things this time. They're making a point of saying Rage Wars have refined aiming, so hopefully, Turok 3 will follow suit. They're wondering if Perfect Dark will still be the king of the hill though now that it's dropped on the scene. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose. More info next month apparently, and more screenshots. This page showcasing Konami's International Track and Field 2000 Screams Classic N64 Magazine preview. It's all about finger-busting sports, which, yeah, they weren't wrong there. Button mashing was definitely the order of the day with these games back then. There are screenshots dotted around showing off the various events like weightlifting, gymnastics on the horizontal bar, swimming, running, and javelin. They're making a big deal about the athletes' faces being really detailed, which was probably impressive at the time, even if looking back they're a bit blocky by today's standards. There's an info burst box that lays out the key details: 128 megabit carts, up to 4 players, controller, expansion and rumble packs are all go, transfer pack is a no-go. It was coming out in March in Japan and April in the UK, and US must have been aiming for the Summer Olympics buzz. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 red blobs, so they were clearly quite hyped for it. The main text goes on about how Konami are aiming for gold after Nagano Winter Olympics on the N64 did alright for them, but this is the Summer Games and all about proper frantic events. They mention it's based on the PlayStation game of the same name, which itself was an update of an old arcade game. 13 events in total, dropping figure skating and curling, sensible choices really. Nobody wants to button mash a curling stone. Instead, they're pushing the javelin, 100 meters breaststroke, 110 meters hurdles, and track cycling as the highlights. The reviewer talks about clay pigeon shooting being in there, which is a bit random, but hey, variety is the spice of life. They're not wrong about the armchair athletics being strenuous though. A few rounds of 100 meters sprints, and your fingers would be aching. Apparently, it's all about hammering those C buttons, and they even mention a tactical element with the javelin angle and triple jump rhythm using the Z button, which they say requires carefully timed tapping. Not easy is the understatement of the year for those Konami track and field games. Basically expect blisters and flushed cheeks, the usual for this type of game really. This page is all about Konami's International Track and Field 2000 on the N64. It's a preview of the game, and it looks pretty good actually, visually at least. They're saying the graphics are astonishing, and that the athletes look and move like the real deal. They've got some screenshots showing off the javelin, and a running race. It does look quite polished for the time, even if the character models are a bit, well, N64-ish. You know, blocky but charming. They're boasting about realistic stadiums filled with spectators, and even cameramen and officials, which was a big deal back then, making the game feel more immersive. It's mentioned that the camera angles are picked to give it a Channel 4 athletics vibe, which is quite a specific reference for us Brits, brings back memories of watching it on TV. It sounds like it can be quite challenging, even on easy mode. Apparently the computer opponents are Olympic standard. They also mention the button bashing events, typical of these kind of games, but they say there are other types of events too. Vaulting horse and trap shooting are mentioned, offering a bit of variety. And thank goodness for a tutorial to explain it all, eh? Nobody wants to be sat there scratching their head for hours. They also talk about multiplayer, which is where these games really came alive back in the day. All your mates round, shouting and swearing at the telly. They're promising a full review in the next issue, so it sounds like they're setting it up to be a big game for the N64. Fingers crossed it's a good one, eh? This page from Planet 64 News Desk is talking about Boy Trouble, which I reckon is their jokey way of referring to the Game Boy Advance. Seems there's rumors of delays to its release, but the magazine seems to think it's still on track for a November 1st release in the States. Nintendo are apparently expecting to flog 1 million consoles and 2 million games at launch, which is a fair bit. Yo, they mention that the Game Boy Color is still selling loads, so Nintendo might hold back the GBA a bit, which makes sense, wouldn't want to step on your own toes. They're chatting about how powerful the GBA is, saying it's like a SNES in your pocket, capable of handling games like Yoshi's Story, and even Star Fox 2, which was the cancelled sequel everyone was always curious about. Blimey, Star Fox 2 on a handheld? That's a thought. And get this, they even wonder if it could manage GoldenEye, which seems a bit ambitious even if they say it's got 2 Super FX chips worth of grunt. Game-wise, they're expecting a spruced-up Super Mario World, a DX version, to show off Miyamoto's 2D platforming skills again. Plus a Pokemon game is a given, probably a conversion of Gold or Silver rather than a brand new one. Standard stuff really, but solid choices to get people buying it. Sounds like the GBA could be a decent bit of kit if it actually comes out when they say it will. This page is a look at what's on the horizon for Nintendo, and blimey there's a lot of Pokemon chat as usual back then. We've got Pokewatch, banging on about a Mew event in the UK. Apparently they were giving away the elusive 151st Pokemon. Those were the days, everyone's scrambling for Mew. Then there's Richachu 3, which is Pokemon Stadium 2. They are really hyping it up, and comparing sales figures to GoldenEye, which seems a bit much. It's Pokemon after all, it will sell like hotcakes anyway. There's some game previews for the Game Boy Advance. They reckon Yoshi's Island, the SNES classic, is more likely to come to the GBA than Yoshi's Story from the N64, which is probably a good shout. That N64 Yoshi game was a bit of a departure from the classic. Super Mario Kart on GBA is mentioned with extra courses and link-up play, which sounded amazing at the time, and Pilot Wings, saying if the GBA is powerful enough it could be spectacular. Then Super Tennis on the N64, their Miffed It missed the boat on the N64 and should get a portable version. Fair enough, it was a decent tennis game. Super Metroid on GBA is a must apparently, which everyone knew already. Kahasa. There's some talk about Tetris DX on the Game Boy Color, wondering how they can improve on it, and then Capcom Street Fighter 2 on the SNES, saying it would look great on the GBA, which was pretty obvious really, and Super Ghouls and Ghosts on the SNES is mentioned as well, which is a proper tough game, that one. There's a job ad looking for a new writer for the magazine, mentioning you need to live in Bath. And finally, Dolphin Speak is talking about MusicX, a music creation tool for the N64, and GBA, something about sound design. Looks a bit complicated from the screenshot. That's the gist of this page then. This page has got a bit of everything really, typical N64 mag spread. In it, there's an article announcing the winners of a Donkey Kong 64 rap competition. Rapper's Delight. Seems like a bit of a laugh. Winners got a trip to Nintendo's HQ in America. Not bad, eh? They even printed some of the winning rap lyrics. Proper cringe, but it's all part of the fun. Rhea. Then there's a bit about Pokemon toys from Toy Fair 2000. Dexter the Talking Pokédex and Pokemon Battle Stadium, yeah. I remember those being advertised everywhere. Hasbro were really pushing them. Apparently they had Think Chip technology. Sounds like marketing fluff to me. But kids lapped it up. Over to the right, there's the quiz. Always a chance to win 50 quid back then. This one's all about N64 games of course, asking about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, the RCP-120 from somewhere, what a pacifist sim dislikes, and Kitty from the mag reckons Hudson should think about Game Boy, not sure what that's about. They're also asking what game has one of the best multiplayer modes money can buy, and about Cyber Tiger, Andy's Neighborhood, and Kissing a Dreamer Goodnight, bit random. Down at the bottom is the entry form for the quiz, and it says last month's winner was Mark Chunt, Aberystwyth. Good for him. Pretty standard fare for an N64 mag page, really. This page showcases some new Pokemon bits and bobs hitting the shelves back in the day. First up we have the Pokemon Fancy Boxer, a springy Pikachu toy from factory clearance shops for £2.99. Apparently it makes a hideously loud boing noise, which the magazine found quite funny, maybe a bit too funny. They're sort of questioning why you'd buy it, which is fair enough really. Next we've got Pokemon standees from www.amazon.co.uk for £8.20. These are the foam boards you pop out and slot together to make 3D figures. They mention you get Mew, Togepi, Psyduck, and 4 Pikachus, and even a floating Pika. The review is pretty positive, saying they're exquisitely drawn and worth the money, giving them a whopping 93%, a bit generous for some foam standees perhaps. Then there are Pokemon mini viewers from Tommy, at £1 each. Apparently these were featured before in issue N64 35ths, and are boy-shaped picture viewers. They are described as tumbling out of vending machines and a bit ominous lurking in toy shops. A bit dramatic for a mini viewer if you ask me, but they say they're neat and there are 6 to collect. They get an 88% rating. Owie. Moving on to the Pokemon Talking Mouse mat from WWL Sales Team for £6.99. This one shouts Pika.Shoo every time you press a hidden button. They reckon it's a bit gimmicky but a good size, and a colourful picture of Ash and Pikachu. They mention it's not as good as the N64 mouse mat they got in Cheltenham for £2, and you can see the wishing fish clock there too, random. This gets an 82% rating. Next is the Pokemon CD wallet from WWL Sales Team again, for £9.99. It's a CD wallet with Pikachu on it, inevitably. They say it's for storing your CDs, and the zip prevents them falling out. Revolutionary. It's got the Pokemon movie soundtrack Britney Spears album, apparently, which dates it nicely, doesn't it? They give it 80%, suggesting it's alright, I suppose. Jur. Finally, we have Pokemon Origami from www.amazon.co.uk for £4.91. They are struggling with the origami instructions to make Jigglypuff and think it's quite complicated, taking them an hour. They say the results are almost worth the effort, but Pikachu comes out looking the worst of the lot. They seem a bit disappointed with this one, only giving it 76%. At the bottom there's a win section, where you can win Pokemon standees by answering a question. Standing on the Shoulders of Giants is the new album from which band? You had to send answers on a postcard to N64 Magazine by April 17th. First 5 correct entries won the standees. Simple times, eh? This page of the magazine is diving headfirst into retro gaming, which is a bit of alright, even back in the year 2000. At the top they're chatting about Furbymon. Apparently Pokemon plush toys are evolving, just like the real thing, and are a step beyond your standard soft toys. Sounds like they might be trying to cash in on both the Furby and Pokemon crazes at the same time. Tendu. Then there's Card Sharp, about the Pokemon trading card game. It seems like it's getting a boost with a brand new first anniversary base set, and an expansion called Team Rocket. Apparently they're bringing in holographic foils and cards featuring evil Pokemon in disguise. Sounds like they're trying to keep the card game hype train rolling along. Moving down, there's a section on Bubble Bobble, an arcade game from 1985. They're saying the Game Boy version is the 20th version of this classic, and it all started in the arcades. It was a simple platform game where you play as these little dinosaur heroes Bub and Bob, blowing bubbles and trapping enemies. Looking at the screenshot, it's proper old school, but addictive as anything back in the day. Next up is Cobra Triangle for the Nintendo, from 1987, made by Rare. Apparently it was a follow-up to RC Pro-Am and it was all about speed. They reckon it was stupefyingly fast on the NES, and incredibly difficult. The screenshot shows a boat racing across water, probably trying to avoid some sort of obstacle. It was known for being tough as nails, even for seasoned players. Finally, there's a retro preview of Namco Museum 64. This is a collection of 5 classic coin-op arcade games on one N64 cartridge. They've bundled together Pac-Man, Memis Pac-Man, Pole Position, Galaxian, and Galaga. It's supposed to be arcade-perfect renditions, and even has a museum section with behind-the-scenes info. They've even included dip switches like the original machines. Looking at the Pac-Man screenshot, it looks pretty spot on to the arcade version, a decent way to relive those smoky arcade days, without having to leave your sofa. Mark Green seems to be the bloke who wrote this bit. This page is all about the Millennium Readers Awards for the N64 Magazine. It's a voting form, asking readers to pick their favorite N64 games of the year and of all time. They're banging on about Legend of Zelda, likely Ocarina of Time still dominating everything, and mentioning Banjo-Kazooie and Turok 2 from the previous year, saying this year's vote will be even more competitive. They list a bunch of games as examples from the past year: Shadow Man, Jet Force Gemini, Donkey Kong 64. Yeah, decent games for their time. And then for all-time classics they reel off Mario, GoldenEye and Zelda again. Plus Mario Kart and Lilac Wars, which is Star Fox 64 to most of us, isn't it? They're basically trying to get everyone to fill out the form and send it in, saying you can win a color N64 console and a game of your choice. Bit of a tempting prize back then, wasn't it? You just had to scribble in your top 5 games for each category and send it off. Simple as that. This page is all about Aiden Chronicles. Looks like THQ are bringing us another RPG, bless them. Right at the top, we've got Coming Soon banner for Planet 64, and they're teasing a few upcoming games: Daikatana, Zelda, Operation Winback, and Excitebike 64. Those were the days, eh? So, Aiden Chronicles then, they've got a little Q&A section talking about magic. Apparently there are 4 schools of magic, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Classic RPG stuff, really. The plot sounds like your typical hero's journey. You play as Alaron, trying to figure out his past and where he comes from, and naturally, there's an evil wizard lurking in the background. Always is, isn't there? The info burst box gives you the nitty-gritty. Cart size is 128 megabits, it's single player, uses the controller pack and rumble pack but not the expansion or transfer packs. Release dates are listed as June for the US and UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is a solid 4 out of 5 oranges, so they're clearly thinking it's going to be a good one. The reviewer reckons PG fans should be happy, because whilst we were all waiting for Mother 3, THQ are stepping in to fill the RPG void with Aiden Chronicles. They say it's from H2O, the team behind Tetris New Talent, which is a bit of a curveball, in it. Described as a heartily traditional RPG, with an experience-based progression system, so you level up your character, learn new skills, the usual drill. They mention lovely true 3D environments to explore. Visually they say it's pleasant, if not brilliant, and the action should be tip-top. There's a screenshot of a rather slippy slidey ice world. They call it obligatory, which is a fair point. Every RPG seems to have one. Apparently battles are turn-based, Final Fantasy style, where you use skills, weapons, and team tactics. They're quite positive about it, reckon it's going to be proper RPG fun and something new for the N64. We'll see about that, won't we? They always sound good on paper. This page is all about Stunt Racer 3000, or SR3K, as it's being called. Boss Games, who did World Driver Championship, are making it, so you know it's going to have some decent driving mechanics. They're billing it as the next big thing in N64 racing, even bigger than World Driver, which was pretty good in its day. Apparently, it's taking the physics from World Driver but chucking in loads of crazy stunts, loops, and massive jumps. They're even saying it's like San Francisco Rush mixed with World Driver, and a bit of WDC thrown in for good measure. Sounds like a bit of a mashup, doesn't it? They keep banging on about how amazing it looks, with real-time lighting and no pop-up. In the Q&A bit, they mention you can tweak your cars, win boss races to get their motors, and there's a 5-league championship thing going on to earn cash and soup up your ride. The info burst at the bottom says Midway are publishing it. It's a 128 megabits cart for up to 4 players and needs a controller pack, expansion pack and rumble pack. They're throwing everything at this one. It's due out in autumn over here, and they're clearly pretty hyped for it, giving it a good anticipation rating. Looks like they are expecting big things from this one, and to be fair, after World Driver you kind of were too. This page is all about Daikatana for the N64. Ah yes, Daikatana, that game had a bit of a reputation, didn't it? They're doing a Q&A section at the top, talking about how PC gamers will know it well. Being made by John Romero, the chap from Quake. Apparently it was known for being delayed. Surprise, surprise. They mention the Office PC gamer guys were proper keen on seeing it on the N64, ditching their Airport Inc. copies to have a look. The main article goes on about how it's a mythical PC shooter coming to the N64. They reckon it's going to be a mix of Marines and Doom-style games, which sounds about right for the time. It's set in different time periods, like future Japan, ancient Greece, medieval Norway, and 21st century San Francisco. Which is a bit of a mashup if you ask me. Loads of levels, 16 areas, and 25 weapons, so plenty to shoot things with. They are calling it reasonably big, but questioning if it's clever, which is a fair point. A lot of games were big but not always clever back then. There's some captions under the screenshots highlighting bits and bobs like drone guns fixed to walls, classic pain from Player 4, and jumping upstairs Mario style, which is a bit random. They also mention shooting control boxes to solve puzzles, which is standard fare. And lava, naturally, because what's a game without some deadly lava? Down the side, there's an info burst table. It says it's from Kemco, which is interesting. Card size is 128 megabits. Supports 1 to 4 players, controller pack EEC, expansion pack EEC, rumble pack EEC, but no transfer pack EEC. Release dates are April for the US and UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 balls. They were pretty hyped for it, weren't they? Even with all the PC drama surrounding it, the N64 version was still something to look forward to, or at least, to see if it could actually live up to any of the hype. This page is all about the latest news on Zelda, Mask of Majula, or Mask of Majora as some people mispronounce it. It's part 2 of their coverage, so they're clearly pretty excited about it. They're saying it's going to be a worthy successor to Ocarina of Time, which is high praise indeed. The screenshots show Link in some colourful, almost psychedelic-looking environments, and they mention he can use the Deku mask. Remember that from Ocarina? Apparently, using the expansion pack will make the game look even better, and have more enemies and bigger levels, so that's good news. They've got an info burst table that lists things like the cart size is 256 megabits, it's 1 player, it uses the expansion pack and rumble pack but not the controller pack or transfer pack. It's slated for release in May, so not too long to wait, thankfully. They're also making a note about Link befriending Japanese comedy cartoon fairies, which is a bit of a weird description, but I guess they mean those little fairy things from the game. Then on the right we've got the coolest competition. Looks like they're giving away a load of tech prizes, proper must-haves back then. There's a pager. Remember those? State-of-the-art communication, in its day. Personal MP3 player, MIDI hi-fi, televideo combo, mini disc player, even a driving seat for racing games I presume, a mobile phone of course, and some clothes vouchers. They're also chucking in a PlayStation with 3 games, a Sony Discman, a Pocket TV, and some brand name trainers. All you had to do was phone up a premium rate number, naturally. Those were the days, eh? Everyone trying to win a pager. This page has a couple of previews, classic N64 stuff really. Up top we have a game called Mysterious Dungeon. Apparently it's a role-playing game that's been in the works for 3 years and is finally heading to the N64. It sounds like it was originally a SNES title, but Chunsoft have decided to bring it to the N64. They reckon they are dramatically evolving the series, especially with the polygonal game world, which they compare to Zelda. Bit of a bold claim there, we'll see about that. The screenshots look alright, a bit kiddie cartoonish, with polygon characters. One caption even mentions, lovely polygon-filled men with hats, and calls it, very Japanese, a bit stereotypical maybe. It's meant to be out in the autumn apparently. Then underneath that we have Tony Hawk's Pro Skateboarding. Surprise surprise, it's coming to the N64. Activision are bringing their skateboarding arcade game to the console. They say it should be out around about now, whenever now is in magazine land. They're comparing it to the PlayStation version and saying the N64 one has better graphics thanks to the expansion pack, so that's something. They mention custom combos, 1080 degrees moves, and all that jazz. They're even wondering if it can live up to 1080 degrees, which is a fair question. One thing they are a bit worried about is the controls using the D-pad being easier than the analog stick, which sounds a bit backwards, doesn't it? They'll let us know more in next month's review. Looks like a decent enough port, I suppose, if you're into that sort of thing. This page is all about Operation Winback, or just Winback as it was known before they rebranded it for the UK. Apparently, it's finally coming to Blighty, and in style according to the mag. It's from Virgin, those Resident Evil lot, and they're saying it's like Metal Gear Solid but with a bit more action. Jean-Luc Cougar is the main man, and he's all about sneaking around and popping terrorists with one shot from his laser pistol. Sounds a bit like GoldenEye Stealthlight maybe? There's a Q&A section where they're saying Winback on PAL is definitely happening. Although they admit it looks a bit crud, their words not mine, but it's got great ideas and smooth animation apparently. They mention 2,000 animations for Jean-Luc, which is a lot I suppose. The plot is the usual terrorist nonsense, capturing satellites and holding the world to ransom, you know the drill. Weapons-wise, rocket launchers, shotguns, grenades, the usual bang-bang stuff is in there. Bangs. Looking at the screenshots, you've got laser beams to avoid, classic stuff. And they're telling you to hide behind boxes to sneak past enemies. Revolutionary. There's a bit about a lock-on system to make shooting easier, handy for us console plebs. And it looks like you have to rescue your teammates as well, typical hero gig. Taya. Down at the bottom there's an info burst table. Virgin is publishing it, it's a 128 megabit cart, supports 1 to 4 players, controller and rumble packs are a yes, expansion and transfer packs are a no. Release dates are down as now for the US and Japan, and May for us here in the UK. They've given it a 4 out of 5 anticipation rating, so they must be somewhat keen. Sounds alright. Could be a laugh in multiplayer, if nothing else. This page is all about Excitebike 64, a game that was causing quite a stir back then. Retro Studios, who were already known for their quality games, were working on Dolphin, which we now know as the GameCube. Rumors were flying about a futuristic racer, like SR3K, from a company made up of Exiguana and Turok coders. Nintendo were testing Dolphin's capabilities, but keeping things hush-hush as usual. The page has a Q&A section about Excitebike 64. Apparently there's a hidden retro game, a bit like Donkey Kong, and Excitebike 64 will have the full version of the original NES Excitebike. Someone asked about multiplayer, and they said it's got a 4-player mode like Wave Race and 1080, running smooth. They reckon it could be the best multiplayer racer on the N64 at that point. Is from Nintendo, a 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, no controller pack but expansion and rumble packs are in, and no transfer pack. It was due out in the summer, and judging by the flags that's America, UK and Japan. Anticipation rating is at 5 out of 5, which is pretty high praise. The main article talks about how good Excitebike 64 looks, and apparently Kemco canned their Top Gear Hyperbike in the UK because of it. Mortal Kombat. Special Forces, that 3D adventure, was on and off. Midway said it was cancelled, but EB in America said they were getting copies. Seems like a bit of a mess, that one. Rare were under the microscope because Perfect Dark was delayed, again, until June. Rumors were they were working on Dino Planet, like Zelda, with dinosaurs apparently, and not linked to the Disney dinosaur movie. The main article continues saying, Excitebike 64 is looking amazing, and they've squirreled it away on their TBC list. Typical magazine speak that. It's supposed to do for bikes what Wave Race and 1080 did for jet skis and snowboards. Unlike Supercross 2000, Excitebike 64 is arcade A, with analog control, skids, power slides, all that jazz. Physics are supposed to be realistic, which is what you want. It's fast, with long tracks, bends, jumps and stadium-style races. They reckon it'll be an absolute gem, Nintendo's latest game looking good as usual. Wow. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One shows a rider crashing, with the caption, "If he doesn't land properly, that'll hurt." Another shows a replay feature. The excellent replay feature makes for some ace viewing. There's a shot of the background. Just look at the quality of that background. Sweet, eh? And another of bike animation. Oof, the animations in Excitebike are gruesomely realistic. Yoink! Finally, there's a landscape shot with a rider in the distance. The camera is completely customizable. Hence this long shot. That sky looks lovely too. All sounds pretty positive for Excitebike 64, which, let's be honest, we all wanted to get our hands on at the time. This page about Perfect Dark, blimey. This was the game everyone was waiting for back then, wasn't it? It's got Joanna Dark on the cover, looking all actiony with a futuristic gun. They're teasing a tasty peek of what's coming to stores soon. Apparently they are still doing finishing touches at classic Rare delays, in it. But they reckon it's going to be one of the top N64 games of all time. Bold claim, Warrington. There are some screenshots, one showing Joanna, in what they say is a co-op mode in single player. Bit weird that. Another one shows some dodgy looking zombie type enemy, one of the Walking Dead they're calling it, and mentioning bendy organic target systems for alien weapons. Sounds a bit out there. The visuals section is banging on about how good it looks, dynamic lighting, more detailed characters, larger environments. They're saying the engine is powerful enough to run it better than GoldenEye at 30 frames per second, even though GoldenEye was about 20 FPS. Bit of a tech boast there. They also mention that enemies don't just fade away when you shoot them, they slump and ooze. Lovely. And get this, they're saying we won't be seeing the Game Boy camera face mapping feature. Apparently, America's moral minority put the kibosh on that. Bit cheeky, but they're promising mix and match deathmatch heads and bodies and extra characters to make up for it. They even have a digger to claim, saying they borrowed the enemy idea for Turok 3. Bit harsh, but you know how these mags were back then. Overall, it's all sounding very promising for Perfect Dark. Proper hyped up. This page is all about Perfect Dark and its stealthy bits. Looks like they're showing off the cloaking device, which is a pretty cool feature if you ask me. Apparently, the game starts with Joanna Dark sneaking into Mr. Blonde's place and you quickly discover the guards have cloaking too, making them go invisible. They describe it as a bit spooky seeing these ghostly shapes moving around. They mention that when the enemies cloak they can't shoot, which is a handy tip, and recommend using the CMP 150 to deal with them. It sounds like the game is geared towards exploration, especially on harder difficulties, which is fair enough, makes it last longer, doesn't it? They also hint at some tricky level design, which isn't a surprise with Rare, they always were good at that. There's a little box about needing the expansion pack to play the full single player game, which is a bit cheeky, but understandable, given the size of these Perfect Dark levels. It does say you can still play multiplayer on a standard N64, but only with 2 players and using cut-down levels. They also mention the solo challenges are still there, so at least there's something to keep you going if you haven't coughed up for the pack yet. Then there's a section called Future Perfect, which is a bit of a pat on the back, saying they asked readers in issue 22 what they wanted in Perfect Dark, and loads of those suggestions actually made it in. They list a bunch of things like real-time lighting, blood, speech, enemies begging for mercy, multiple routes, deathmatch bots, realistic injuries, heavy weapons, and improved AI. 9 out of 10 of the top requests made it, apparently. The only thing they didn't include was proper jumping, which is a bit odd for a first-person shooter, but you can still fall off ledges to your doom, so swings and roundabouts, I suppose. They seem pretty chuffed with themselves, and rightly so. It's looking like it's going to be a belter when it finally comes out. They're hoping for a May or June release, fingers crossed they hit that date. This page is all about King of the Hill mode, a proper classic multiplayer game type, isn't it? Apparently it's a bit of a rarity on the N64, which is a surprise. They're talking about using computer-controlled sims in team games, which sounds like a laugh if your mates aren't around. They've got these descriptions of different sim personalities: enemy, friend, assassin, and backup. The enemy sim is pretty straightforward, just wants to shoot you, naturally. Friend sim is a pacifist type, more interested in collecting ammo and weapons, a helpful sort if you need supplies. The assassin is a vendetta sim, a proper nutcase, who will just go for you relentlessly. Sounds a right pain to deal with. And the backup sim is your defender, stays put in a secure spot, good for holding down a location. There are little captions under the screenshots giving tips for each type. For example, with the enemy sim, they say friendly sims are tinted to match your team color, which makes sense to avoid a right old mess. Then there's a section called Censored. Key. Seems like they were showing off this Game Boy camera feature last month where you could put your face in the game. Apparently they showed someone digitizing a picture of a lovely lady called Andrea, and then, well, terminating her in the game with extreme prejudice. Sounds a bit much, even for a laugh. Anyway, seems Nintendo got cold feet about it. Ken Lobb, the worst weapon fella from GoldenEye fame, announced that the camera mode was being cut. The official reason was bugs causing crashes in deathmatches, but they reckon the real reason was American psychologists thinking it would make gun-happy Yanks even more violent. Blimey. So Nintendo, worried about offending parents in the US, decided to axe it. Thanks America, they say. with a bit of sarcasm. Duncan Botwood, who wrote this, wasn't too pleased about the censorship. Shame really, could have been a bit of a laugh, even if slightly morbid. This page showcases Perfect Dark and its cooperative mode, labeled Follow Me. It's suggesting that playing Coop is the best way to tackle the tougher missions, especially if one player knows the levels inside out. Apparently if you don't know your way around, you'll get lost, which, yeah, the levels in Perfect Dark could be a bit maze-like, couldn't they? It even warns you about accidentally shooting civilians, those poor Datadyne office workers just wandering around. The screenshots show different co-op scenarios, like one player being attacked while the other is lost, or one waiting by a lift. They even point out how graphically impressive the game still is, which, for the N64, it really was pushing the boat out. Then there's a section called No Mem is Dark, I Expect You To Tout, which is all about the death animations. They're saying Rare's HQ had a gym for motion capture, and it shows. They've got sections highlighting different death animations, like Crown Jewels, where a guard's posture is apparently something to behold, the Lambada, where a bloke throws away his weapon and starts dancing oddly when shot, a bit theatrical, isn't it? Then there's Theatrical, about how grim the death animations are, and how they've brought back animations from GoldenEye, along with some new extra disturbing ones, and the blood trails, making it all a bit too realistic perhaps. Finally, Hello There talks about the headshots, saying they are still the best way to deal with enemies, just like in GoldenEye, and you even get blood splatter on the wall. Lovely. So yeah, all in all, it's focusing on the Coop fun, and the rather over-the-top death animations in Perfect Dark. Quite a step up from GoldenEye, if you were into that sort of thing. This page is all about the Nintendo Dolphin, which is what we all knew as the GameCube back then. It's a special investigation piece, so they're teasing some top-secret info about it. It mentions Howard Lincoln making a promise at E3 1999 about the Dolphin, and keeping details under wraps. They're calling it Nintendo's next-generation console, which is fair enough as it was the successor to the N64. The page is designed like a jigsaw puzzle, which is quite clever given the title. There's a picture of what they think the Dolphin disc might look like, and they jokingly compare it to the 3DO, which is a bit of a dig. Wasn't the 3DO a bit rubbish? They also mention a Dolphin factory in Club 64 on page 77, for readers to have a go at designing their own console. So, it's all speculation and rumor mongering about the new console, typical magazine stuff at the time to build up hype. This page is all about the N64's successor, codenamed Dolphin, and it's framed as a proper special investigation by the magazine, getting us all hyped up for what's to come. First up is SPEed. They're banging on about how Dolphin is going to be lightning fast and leave the PlayStation 2 and Dreamcast in the dust. Howard Lincoln, the chairman of Nintendo of America, is quoted from way back in May 1999 saying it'll be the fastest and most powerful home video game system, period. They're talking about the copper wiring, and a pea-sized processor from IBM called Gecko, running at 400 MHz. Blimey, 400 MHz sounded fast back then. They even reckon it could hypothetically run 4 copies of Ocarina of Time at once. A bit of a mad claim, that. And DVDs, finally! They're promising quicker loading times, which was always a pain back in the day. Next section is visuals. Apparently Dolphin's graphics will knock everyone's socks off. Axel Herr from Nintendo of Europe reckons it'll be 33% above the performance of PlayStation 2. They're mentioning ArtX, a team who worked on the N64 graphics, designed the new chip. It's clocked at 200 MHz and can chuck out 30 million shapes a second, making for loads of detail. And they've got this S3TC compression system to squeeze more textures onto a DVD. Sounds very technical, but we just wanted games that looked amazing, didn't we? Rinja. Then there's sound. The fact is, Dolphin games will have CD quality in-game music. Julian Egerbrecht, president of Factor 5, is quoted saying Dolphin Sonics will blow PlayStation 2 and Dreamcast out of the water. Apparently, the sound chip is 3 times more powerful than the N64's, and it can stream music straight off the DVD. Factor 5 are lending their MusicX audio tools, the same lot who did the music for Rogue Squadron, which sounded brilliant. Dolby surround sound is mentioned too, and they're saying to expect Jet Force Gemini-style Sonics. There's a screenshot of some music software, looks like the sort of thing developers would use. 2. Finally, Internet. They're talking about Dolphin being able to access the Internet and link up with the Game Boy Advance. Peter Main, a company executive, said both Dolphin and Game Boy Advance will have a built-in modem back in November 1999. Nintendo were keeping their online plans hush-hush, but they were hinting at online Mario Kart and Perfect Dark. Playing with mates miles away was the big dream, wasn't it? Konami and a company called Mobile 21 Feet were apparently working on ways to link the Dolphin and GBA, and they even mentioned the face mapping idea from Perfect Dark, wondering if it would make a comeback. There's a picture of a Game Boy Advance there. So, overall, it's all about the Dolphin being super powerful, looking amazing, sounding incredible, and even going online. Lots of big promises and hype for what would eventually become the GameCube. Good times, getting excited about all this new tech. This page is a special investigation into the Dolphin, which we now know as the GameCube. Right, so first up, movies. Apparently it's nailed on that the Dolphin will play DVD movies. They even quote some Nintendo techie saying they're testing it out in Japan to see how the market reacts. Nintendo's primary concern is still games though, unsurprisingly. They are saying Dolphin will be able to play DVDs, but games are the main focus, and they reckon Japanese gamers will lap it up, and if it's successful there, we'll get it over here. Louis. Next, games. Miyamoto himself reckons the creative possibilities are even more significant than the N64, which is high praise indeed, isn't it? Rare, those legends, are also confident. Chris Stamper thinks they can make even more amazing games, and mentions Yamauchi is keen for Dolphin to stand out with quality software. They're banging on about Shigsai design controllers and built-in rumble. Proper next-gen stuff. Developers are getting their hands on kits now, so they are cracking on with games for it worldwide. Prices next. Dolphin is expected to be at an irresistible price point. George Harrison, Nintendo's marketing VP, wants to keep it under $200 to make it mass-market friendly. Yamauchi, grumpy old Yamauchi, has apparently moaned about PlayStation 2's heftier price tag. Nintendo's aiming for under £200, cheaper than their cartridge games, so good value for money they are saying. Release date: expect to get your hands on Dolphin by the end of the year apparently, which is optimistic. Morgan Stanley Dean Witter reckons 2 million consoles by March 2001. They're thinking a Christmas launch, but it might be in America first, then Japan, which could mean a simultaneous worldwide launch, which would be something. And the rest? Section lists a bunch of exciting things. Nintendo gave a demo of Dolphin's capabilities with EA Sports FIFA 2001, so that'll be on its way. The Final Fantasy Square lot are supposedly dead keen on Dolphin. EAD are working on a secret racing project, could be 1080 Degrees snowboarding follow-up. Retro Studios, formed after Iguana UK, are working on 5 titles, including an American football game and an RPG. Titus are working on a Robocop game for Game Boy Advance. Nintendo of America's in-house developers and Ridge Racer 64 authors NSTC are knuckling down. And sources say Ubisoft are planning Tarzan and Batman adventures, and even a Donald Duck game. Quite the lineup potentially. Then there's Grand Design's the N64 team's guesses at what Dolphin might look like, and they are a laugh, aren't they? Jess's big shoe. Looks like a massive shoe with buttons and controller ports, bit mad. Martin's Cyberglobe is like a big globe. Plugs into your brain, apparently. Tim's box is a transparent box, see-through lid, nothing too crazy there. Mark's box, well that's just a PlayStation lookalike. Very unimaginative controllers too. Will's effort is a Pac-Man ghost shape, with a DVD spinning on its head, bit weird. They are all a bit bonkers, aren't they? Still, fun to see what they've come up with. This page delves into what we can expect on the upcoming Dolphin console, which we now know as the GameCube. Right at the top is Nintendo and HAL Laboratory, talking about a new Mario game, a proper sequel to Super Mario 64. Apparently Luigi will be playable from the start this time, not just a palette swap like in some of the older games. They're teasing more Mario Kart and party games too, which, let's be honest, were always a safe bet for Nintendo. Factor 5 are beavering away on something called Tornado. They're the Rogue Squadron lot, so you know it'll be slick. Sounds like a Metroid-style third-person shooter, a bit different for them, based on the old Turrican games apparently. Exploration, destruction, a strong story they're throwing in the kitchen sink. Dual characters and 2-player mode, naturally. And they're linking it up to Star Wars Episode 2, which is ages away, but hey, synergy, right? Naturally. Rare of course are mentioned. They've got Dolphin dev kits and are doing a Disney game, their first Mickey Mouse title. Sounds very ambitious, whatever that means. They're also hinting at a Perfect Dark follow-up, and possibly even Killer Instinct 3, which was always just a rumor back on the N64, wasn't it? Plus more of the Diddy Kong Racing spin-offs, good grief. Sapphire on the scene too, remember them? Top Gear Rally and Rainbow Six guys on the N64. They're doing an adventure RPG set in ancient Greece, a third-person affair with sword fights, Xena style. Could be interesting, I suppose. Acclaim, bless them, were early adopters of the Dolphin tech. Turok is guaranteed to continue. Naturally, they churn those out like sausages. NFL Quarterback Club is mentioned, and they're even doing a Dreamcast-style skateboarding game, trying to chase trends as always. Then there's a Dolphin Spy section, bit of hush-hush gossip. Apparently Dolphin is really powerful, more so than the PlayStation 2. Who's got dev kits? The big boys EAD Rare, Factor 5 to start with, Nintendo being all controlling, as usual, restricting who gets their hands on the new toys first. What will games look like? They're saying Resident Evil 2 intro quality, crystal clear visuals. Lofty promises, we'll see about that. Jera. Christmas launch is still on, despite rumors of delays. They reckon manufacturing starts in summer, Japan gets it in December. Worldwide launch later, obviously. Do they need to wait for Miyamoto to finish the new Mario? Tricky one. Might launch with some fighting games or racers first, killer apps to get people interested, then Mario later. Makes sense, I guess. Great. Could this mean Nintendo is back on top? Developers are supposedly frustrated with the PS2, can't quite get their heads around it. Dolphin might be much easier to work with, could be a game changer, they're saying. Bit optimistic, but you never know. Pakaka. At the bottom, there are some quick mentions. Midway are doing more NFL Blitz and Ready to Rumble, surprise surprise. Dreamcast Sneak Mup from Promethean Design is coming to Dolphin Picasso, they're calling it. 3DO are bringing army men and battle tanks, those never die, do they? And sports specialists Left Field are committed to Dolphin development. So, a bit of everything coming, it seems. This page is the front cover of Planet Game Boy, issue 15 from April 2000. Right at the top, it shouts, "Reviewed this issue," and mentions battle tanks and Vegas games on page 38. Don't know about you, but battle tanks on the Game Boy Color? Seems a bit ambitious to me. Below that, it's got N64 Presents Planet Game Boy, so it's a pull-out section in the N64 Magazine. Clever idea. The main focus of the cover is Micro Machines, boldly claiming it's the best racer on the Game Boy. Bit strong, isn't it? But Micro Machines was always a laugh, even on the older consoles, so maybe it's decent on the Game Boy. There's a picture of some very blocky-looking race cars, red and yellow ones, on what looks like a green pool table felt. Classic Micro Machines style, using household objects as racetracks. To the left, there's a Win section, offering a GB power pack and wallet if you send in your Game Boy camera pics. Remember the Game Boy camera? That thing was hilarious. Proper blurry photos, but good for a laugh. Down at the bottom, in Riti Iero, they're talking about BC Kid 2, that's Psychic Cave Boy returns apparently, and Battle City. Battle City, now that's a proper retro game, dating back to the 80s they say, state of the art in 1980. Wonder if that's the old arcade game or something similar. There are tiny screenshots of these retro games. And finally, it clearly states, issue the 15th of April 2000. So there you go, that's the front cover. Looks like a decent issue if you were into your Game Boy back then. This page of Planet Game Boy starts off by mentioning the usual delays for games. Nothing new there then, is it? But then it gets into the good stuff, new games for the old brick, the Game Boy. First up is 3D Dynamite, which is actually Tyrannosaurus Tex. Apparently this game is pushing the Game Boy to its limits with 3D graphics, which back then was pretty impressive on the little handheld. They saw it at the ECTS show, and it was just a tech demo, but Eidos snapped it up. Sounds like a bit of a dodgy plot involving dinosaurs, and cowboys has been thrown in for good measure. They reckon it runs at a smooth 30 frames per second, and uses clever tricks to display loads of colors. The reviewer seems quite impressed, saying it's going to be a hot property for the Game Boy. Then there's a bit about Metal Gear Tiny Cartridge, which we now know is Metal Gear Solid on the Game Boy Color. They popped into Konami's office to have a look. It's supposed to be similar to the PlayStation game, but with a different story and setting. It's got VR training missions to teach you the stealth gameplay, and even a 2-player battle mode. They mention Mei Ling giving gaming tips, and point out the VR mission objective in screenshots. It's on a big 32 megabit cartridge, which was quite something for the Game Boy back then. It's not out until the end of April, so they're holding off the full review until next month, but are looking forward to it. There's also a quick mention of delays for International Karate, and Pokemon Pinball, and a dig at a hilariously ugly Star Wars spin-off. Oh, and someone could apparently win a free game if they can prove it was written in BASIC? Bit of a random offer, that one. This page is a review for Micro Machines 1 and 2 Turbo Tournament on the Game Boy Color. 4 stars they've given it, which is pretty decent back then, well worth a look. This is an excellent title as they put it. Micro Machines classic top-down racer. In it, been around for ages, even on the old NES and Game Boys in black and white. This one's in color though, and packs the first 2 games onto one cart, which is a lot of tracks and vehicles for a handheld. They reckon it's got about 60 tracks and 15 vehicles, which is a fair whack for a Game Boy game. They're saying the handling is spot on and different for each type of vehicle, which makes sense. You wouldn't expect a boat to handle like a sports car. They mention helicopters being super skiddy. Sounds about right for micro machines. It caters for up to 8 players with the link cable, which was always a laugh, though finding enough mates with Game Boys and link cables was always the tricky bit. They've got screenshots showing different types of vehicles like sports cars on workbench tracks, dirt bikes in the garden, boats in a soapy bath, trucks, and racing cars on a pool table. Classic micro machine scenarios, using household objects as tracks. They even joke about someone's phone number being in one of the screenshots. Bit cheeky. Overall, sounds like they thought it was a good handheld racer for the time, a solid 4-star game. This page is a review page. In it, we're looking at 2 Game Boy titles here, Battletang X and Vegas Games. Jarix. First up, Battletang X. It's trying to be like the N64 game, but clearly, on the Game Boy it's a bit stripped back, isn't it? They mention it's lost the multiplayer, which is a shame, but it's still got the Queen Lords blokes. Sounds like you drive around in tanks, blowing up buildings, that kind of thing. They reckon it's a bit too easy, which is probably right for a Game Boy game back then, aimed at the younger crowd maybe. They even compare it to the old Namco game Battle City, saying that's better, which is a fair shout. Battle City was a classic. They've given it 3 stars, seems about right for a handheld version, Battle City. Then there's Vegas Games, a collection of casino games for the Game Boy. Baccarat, blackjack, craps, keno, the whole shebang. Apparently it's quite good fun even without real money, which I suppose is the point, isn't it? They mention the presentation is slick with casino photos, and you can play all the usual casino games. They even say they won 8 grand on craps and then lost it all by forgetting their password. Classic gamer move that. Another 3 stars for this one. Wydeen. Both reviews get a little star rating out of 5, both getting a 3. There are screenshots of tanks driving around in battle tanks and some casino game screens from Vegas Games. Both games are out now and don't have color. It's Game Boy, what do you expect? Password link up for both too, that's how we rolled back then. Standard stuff for a portable review page, really. This page showcases a couple of Game Boy reviews, Bubble Bobble and Yoda Stories. First up is Bubble Bobble. Right off the bat, they're moaning about the screen crunching and the colorful backgrounds being confusing, which is a bit rich coming from a magazine that was probably full of garish adverts at the time. They're saying it's a bit of a shambles compared to the arcade classic and marked it down a bit, giving it a 2 out of 5 star rating. They mention the screen scrolling being dodgy and ruining gameplay, and the 2-player mode being removed, which, yeah, that's a big miss for Bubble Bobble. Baron von Blubber makes an appearance. Don't lose sight of him, they warn. Bit obvious, isn't it? Borington-chi. Then there's Yoda Stories. This one gets the same 2-star treatment. They call it a desktop accessory from the PC, which it was, wasn't it? Bit of time filler. They reckon it's unchallenging, and the graphics are a bit ropey. They mention Luke Skywalker, and finding items over 15 levels. They also have a pop at Luke's X-Wing, calling it a Skoda-style X-Wing fighter, which is a bit harsh, even for 2000. And they joke about the lightsaber animation being the only real animation, which is probably true. They sum it up as a bit GCSE computer science project like. Ouch. Young Skywalker lops the head off a Jawa, and good riddance too. Charming. Both games are priced at £25, and they both have password link up, no color, only out now. So standard Game Boy fare at the time, nothing too exciting, judging by the scores. This page features a couple of retro Game Boy reviews. First up, it's BC Kid 2, costing 15 quid from Hudson. Password saves, no link up, and definitely no color on that old Game Boy screen. They're calling BC Kid one of the maddest characters ever on a Nintendo machine, comparing him to Bonk, and saying he's a bit deranged, which is probably fair. Apparently back in the day, Hudson on the PC Engine was top-notch, and this Game Boy version was a success, even in black and white. They mention his weird transformations, like Mario but random, and he can even turn into a Spock or a burglar, and some sort of psycho alien beast. The review talks about him climbing walls with his teeth. Proper bizarre stuff. They've given it a 5 out of 5, so they must have been well impressed with this tooth-propelled platformer. Then underneath that is Battle City from Namco, also 15 quid. No save, but link up is a yes, still no color though. They're saying it's a simple maze game, a bit Pac-Man and Armored Car, with tanks thrown in. Apparently it gave Namco some arcade success back in 1980, and this Game Boy version was a decent conversion, good for killing time in chlorine-stinking leisure centers. The idea is you protect your base from enemy tanks, and the first ones are easy but then harder ones come along. You can shoot through walls for shortcuts and power-ups. Simple but lots of tension. They reckon it might be a bit too basic now, but back then it was good train journey fodder. Maybe not quite Tetris level though. They've given it a 4 out of 5, so still a solid little game. The next page of Planet Game Boy Magazine is here, and it's a tips and guides bonanza. We've got level passwords for Ants, which, if I remember right, was that game based on the cartoon movie. It was alright, a bit kiddie-ish, but those passwords could be handy for the younger siblings. Then there's Mario Deluxe with some details on how to unlock Race Black Boo mode by hitting 100,000 points. A bit of a grind for that, wasn't it? And also how to change Mario's starting size. Always useful if you wanted to mix things up. Warren Deluxe. Speedy Gonzales gets a look in with level passwords too. Another cartoon platform. I can't say I was blown away by that one back in the day, but passwords are passwords. Finally, Street Fighter Alpha gets a dancing Sagat trick. Sounds like a bit of fun, trying to cheese the game by losing on purpose to get to Bison. Kids those days were always looking for these weird quirks in games. There's also a high scores section, with Pokemon Pinball, Mario Deluxe, Tetris DX and Game & Watch Gallery all featured, listing some impressive scores by gamers. Good on them for getting their names in print. Right at the bottom there's the address to send in your own high scores, if you were that way inclined. All fairly standard stuff for a game guide page really. This page is the Game Boy Gallery from Planet Game Boy, and it's a right laugh looking back at these. It's all about mugshots taken with the Game Boy camera, and printed out on that thermal printer, remember those? This month's theme seems to be muties, which is their charming way of saying weird faces. They've got a winner this month, some bloke from Hornchurch who's created Fibre Optic Lampman. Sounds like a superhero to me, though I'm not entirely sure how a lamp qualifies. Then there's a Pikachu looking like it's being electrocuted, submitted by Dave Fryer from Seaton. There's a Penguin Boy from Peterhead, a Swansea special friend, and someone called Lewis Newman in London has done a simple but effective pick. Trevor Ryan from Ireland has submitted something that looks like a nebula, which is a bit ambitious for a Game Boy camera, isn't it? There are more dodgy portraits. Samir Spaiti from Manchester has created something sickening, which is giving everyone nightmares apparently. Ruben Larson from Norway has sent in another classy offering, and David Jones from London has done a perfect Mutie symmetry. Crikey, they're really going for it with the Mutie theme. Stockport's Adam Hattersley has sent in a heartfelt plea for salvation, but they can't help him, poor bloke. Jason Frost's convict ancestors have made an appearance apparently. Perry and Ben Turner from London have had a bad hair day, and Johnny Rotten would be proud, they reckon. Liam Scher from Livingston has sent in his lizard. And finally, there's a two-faced man by Ryan O'Connor, and an alien, courtesy of Chris and Nino Hez. Well spotted, folks, they say. Cheeky. Right at the bottom, there's a reminder to send in your freaks to the Planet Game Boy address in Bath. They'll even give you a GameStar Game Boy Power Pack and wallet if they like your picture enough. Which is a decent enough bribe, I suppose. All in all, just a bit of fun with the old Game Boy camera, back when grainy black and white photos were cutting edge. This page covers a DISCOTECH special investigation all about the Nintendo 64DD. Right on the page it says bye bye baby, suggesting if you're thinking of importing one, don't bother as it's about £500. Apparently Nintendo were initially planning a subscription service for the 64DD, which sounds a bit mad, but thankfully they shifted to selling hardware packages. The article is looking at whether this disk drive add-on, which has finally hit Japan, is actually worth the wait after all these years. They mention featuring it way back in issue 1 of N64 Magazine, around 3 years prior, so back when the N64 was still quite new, eh? They're wondering if it will even reach British shores, or if it'll be like some mythical beast we never see. It seems they've got one in the office to test out and see if it lives up to the hype, or if it's just a novelty with some online features that might be a test run for what they're planning with Dolphin, which we now know was the GameCube. They're trying to figure out if it's revolutionary or just a bit of fun, and they're going to read on and find out more, and so will we. This page is an interesting look at the 64DD, Nintendo's disk drive add-on for the N64. It's titled, What's in the Box? And it's breaking down exactly what you'd get if you were to import this thing from Japan. First up is the D unit itself, which they say looks exactly like it did years ago when it was first shown off. They call it chunky and well made. Which, yeah, it kind of was. Then there's the modem cart, which was essential to get online with RANnet, Nintendo's Japanese online service. Alongside that, you got the modem cable to plug it into your phone line. Bit of a faff that, and they even mention you'd need to read Japanese and the call charges would be horrendous if you tried to use it from the UK cheeky. Next is the Doshin the Giant /RANnet disc. A proper disc in a plastic case for a Nintendo game that was a bit unusual back then, wasn't it? This disc has the game Doshin the Giant and the info to log on to RANnet. They also mention Mario Artist Paint Studio, a next-gen Mario Paint for the SNES, but this time it's on the 64DD and comes with the Nintendo mouse, which to be fair was pretty neat. And of course you needed the expansion pack. Essential for anything on the 64DD, it seems. Finally, there's a bit called Write Stuff, discussing the rewritable 64 megabytes discs. They say it's enough for a game twice the size of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, but still tiny compared to a CD. They speculate about new content for Doshin being released online later, but it's just a possibility, maybe. The page then moves on to talk about Doshin the Giant itself. They call it a god game, where you play as a giant waking up on an island. The idea is you can progress by helping villagers or being evil, signified by hearts or skulls. The more love or evil, the bigger and more powerful you get. Controls are simple. Lift things, jump to flatten land, and take photos. Gameplay involves picking up relics and moving buildings. You can even reshape the landscape, flatten hills, and cause floods. Apparently you can switch to an evil version of Doshin to destroy things with a handclap. At the end of the day, Doshin goes back to normal size, and you get points based on how you played good or evil. They reckon a mix of both is the best way to go. Sounds a bit bonkers really, but in a typically quirky Nintendo way, you know? This page delves into the murky waters of the 64DD and one of its launch titles, Mario Artist Paint Studio. It's presented as part of an artistic trilogy, which is a bit of a stretch, even for Nintendo. They mention Polygon Studio and Talent Maker are coming later, which we are still waiting on at the time. Warranted. The article focuses on how Paint Studio works with the Game Boy camera. Remember that brick? You could take snaps with it and transfer them to the 64DD to mess about with in Paint Studio. They've shown examples of what you can do, labeling sections as disfigurement, which is a bit harsh, basically just editing your photos with pens and brushes. Then there's extra furnishings, which are decals you can stick on your photos, hairstyles, eyes, that sort of thing. A 70s afro is apparently their favorite, bit random, innit? Extras is basically just pre-drawn pictures to color in, and scenery to use in your creations, lots of Nintendo characters from Mario to Pokemon and even Diddy Kong Racing. Then there's 3D video, which shows off some simple animated scenes. They've highlighted a dolphin scene, a dinosaur scene, and an alien robot scene, which looks a bit like something from Tonic Trouble, remember that? You can change camera angles and textures in these. The reviewer seems a bit underwhelmed, calling Paint Studio a mere novelty, and says the 64DD might be destined to be nothing more than an intriguing curio for completist retro gamers in years to come. Ouch. They mention Doshin the Giant being slow and primitive. Overall it sounds like they think the 64DD and Paint Studio are a bit of a letdown, not the revolution we were hoping for. Fair enough, really. It's not exactly setting the world on fire, is it? This page is packed with info, kicking off with a look at upcoming 64DD stuff and N64 games. First up, the F-Zero X expansion kit, finally letting you build your own tracks and even your own vehicles. About time, if you ask me. Then there's SimCity 64, which was a PC favorite making its way to the N64. Zooming in on your cities and sticking Mario statues in there, a bit of a novelty, but a laugh. Ultimate War is mentioned too, a real-time strategy game from Seta. Apparently it's a bit like Command & Conquer but Japanese, so who knows what that was like as it was all in Japanese. Lastly for the game previews there is Seta Golf, yet another golf game, arriving around the same time as Mario Golf. It would have to be pretty good to knock Mario off the top spot. Gesture. Over on the right, it's all about the deals. Console offers with expansion packs and bundled games, always tempting. Then there's a ton of N64 and Game Boy games for sale, listed by price. They're also pushing licensed stuff like Nintendo beanies and Donkey Kong action figures, typical merchandise fodder. N64 wheels and rumble packs are there too if you wanted to upgrade your setup, plus cables and cards for all sorts of things, and Game Boy Color deals for those still rocking the handheld. Loads of games listed, mostly at reasonable prices, but nothing there that's making me rush out to the shops right now. This page is the cover for N64 Arena Magazine, issue 430. Right in your face is Ridge Racer 64, splashed across most of the page with that Reiko Nagase bird looking all nice and digital. Feeling a need for speed, it asks? Well yeah, who didn't back then on the N64? It says it's the fastest racer in town, and an absolute beauty, A bit much maybe, but Ridge Racer was always a looker. There were also little boxes teasing reviews for a load of other games. Battlezone, Battle Tanks, Global Assault, always with the tanks those guys, Disney's Tarzan, Cyber Tiger Woods Golf Bet that was a laugh, Supercross 2000, and Vigilante 8-second offense. Each one with a go-to-page thing so you know where to find the full reviews inside. Looks like a packed issue, this one. This page is all about how N64 Magazine reviews games, laying out their essential information and, if you're in a hurry, sections. They use something called an info burst for quick details, shown here with a hypothetical game called Metroid 64 inches from Nintendo. It lists things like cart size, 256 megabits, which was pretty standard at the time, player numbers, controller and cartridge save types, and whether it uses expansion or rumble packs, or the Game Boy pack. Looks like Metroid 64 feet would have been out in April in the US, May in the UK and November in Japan, costing £40, which is the usual price for a new N64 game back then. Then they've got the pluses and minuses and if you like this is sections for quick opinions and game recommendations, based on similarity to other titles. For example, if you liked GoldenEye you might like Turok 2 or Quake 2. Underneath that they explain the scoring categories: visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and verdict. They've even given Mickey Mouse 64 as an example, scoring it a 9 for visuals, 8 for sounds and mastery, 7 for lifespan and giving it an overall 90%, calling it Amazing Mario beating Mickey Mouseathon. Bit of a strange comparison, Mario and Mickey Mouse, but there you go, Warrington Nostra. The page also breaks down the score ranges. 85% and above is a star game. 8,470% means it's good fun and worth buying. 6,950% is playable, but not special. 4,920% is lazily programmed, and 190% is just awful, absolute wretched crud. Fair enough, they don't pull any punches. Finally, there's Team 64, showing pictures of the reviewers. Tim Weaver apparently wasn't used to the speed of Ridge Racer 64. Will Overton's hair was too extravagant for Ridge Racer 64. Andrea Bolger says, "Wah hey!" for Disney's Tarzan. Justin Webb is face-pulling over Supercross 2000. Jess Bickham is befriending fairies and wearing tights while playing Battlezone. Martin Kitts is doing something weird with his lips and Cyber Tiger. Mark Green likes Ridge Racer 64. Dark Mark looks miserable playing Vigilante 8. And Pikachu, well, Pikachu's playing some Pikachu driving game and just making Pikachu noises. A colourful bunch. Team 64. Seems like they're having a laugh reviewing these games. This page is all about Ridge Racer 64, smack bang in the middle of issue 40. It's an N64 arena piece, and seems to be a preview, checking in on the game. There are a bunch of screenshots showing the gameplay. Looks like they're showing different points in a race. You can see the time ticking by, the rank changing, and the speedo showing how fast you're going. Typical racing game stuff, innit? They've got an info burst box giving you the lowdown on the game. Nintendo are behind it. Cartridge size is 256 megabit, which was pretty standard for the time. Says 1 to 4 players, so split-screen multiplayer was in, always a good thing. Controller pack saving is a no-go, but cartridge and password save are in, so that's alright. Expansion pack and transfer pack are also a no-go, but rumble pack is supported, which is a decent rumble feature at the time. It was out now in the UK and US, but Japan had to wait until April. 40 quid, not bad really for a new release back then. Tom Tao. The main article is talking about how they were excited for Ridge Racer on the N64. They mention it's based on the original Ridge Racer, the PlayStation game, which was getting on a bit by this point, about 7 years old. They were a bit worried at first because the early version they played felt a bit rough around the edges, clumsy even, but they're saying the full game is here now, and they're about to give it a proper 8-page review to see if their worries were justified. Sounds like they were hoping for good things, but maybe had some doubts after seeing early versions. Classic preview stuff really. The next page in the mag is all about Ridge Racer 64, finally coming to the N64. They're calling it Namco's terrifyingly quick racer, which is a bit much, isn't it? But anyway, the article Courses of Action talks about the game's tracks. Apparently there are only 3 main environments, but they've got 5 championship cups that make you race through each world up to 4 times. Sounds like they're trying to get some mileage out of not many levels. They mention these unseen sealed-off routes that pop up, which I suppose is to keep things freshish. Also, apparently some tracks are set at dusk or in the dark, making it tricky with just your headlights, which is a bit of alright I suppose. There are a few screenshots dotted around. One shows a car going around a tight tunnel corner, which they say is so bad it made them smash joypads. Dramatic! Another is of the course selection screen, and there's a mention of a hidden Ridge Extreme track, calling it a mighty Purdy, but tough nut to crack. Sounds like a challenge then. Then there's a section called Fuzzy Logic, which is a bit wanky. Basically it's saying that NSTC, who made this N64 version, nicked bits from the arcade and PlayStation Ridge Racers. They seem impressed with the car headlights and brake lights, saying they leave a mesmerizing glow behind them, and that it's as good as Ridge Racer Type 4. Bit strong, isn't it? Type 4 was on the PlayStation and looked pretty good. Warrington Norsa. The whole page is dominated by a massive picture of a woman wearing a white dress with RR64 on it. Very early 2000s video game vibe. Ridge Racer 64 inches is plastered across the page in big letters, so you can't miss what it's about. Seems like they are quite excited for this one then. This page is a how-to guide for winning your first cup in Ridge Racer Novice on the N64. It's laid out like a track map, guiding you through 8 key points of the Ridge Racer Novice course, with screenshots and numbered instructions. It's all about getting that first win, which back in the day felt like a proper achievement in itself. Even if Ridge Racer wasn't exactly the hardest racer on the system, they're giving classic tips, like nailing the start by revving the engine to the right point, then gentle turns after the slip road, keeping left for the bridge corner, and the all-important power slides for the tighter bends. Number 4 mentions a compulsory power slide after a hill, which is a bit strong, but yeah, power sliding was key in Ridge Racer. They even point out tunnel number 2 for overtaking, which is helpful. The whole thing is aimed at getting you through the race smoothly and hitting the finish line in first. It's a decent little guide for anyone struggling with the basics back then, although veterans would probably just breeze through this course anyway, wouldn't they? This page showcases track guides for Ridge Racer 64, focusing on the Renegade Novice and Revolution Novice courses. Renegade Novice, described as a mountainous and tricky desert track, is broken down into 8 sections. The guide highlights the narrow roads and advises hugging the trackside to overtake, noting gentle and easy curves early on, then some snake-like bends that require power sliding. It also points out overtaking opportunities and a downhill section with crazy speeds. Narrow roads. The Revolution Novice track, a forest course, is also presented in 8 sections. The guide mentions a long straight at the start, easy right turns, a tunnel for overtaking, and a deviously placed hump. The final section talks about a deceptively easy final turn that needs sharp power sliding. Both guides provide snapshot images from the game to illustrate the advice. It seems like they're aiming to help players master these tracks, highlighting the trickier bits and offering tips on how to get around them effectively, which was always handy in Ridge Racer 64. This page delves into Ridge Racer 64, proper arcade racer for the N64. It kicks off by pointing out that Namco, bless them, aren't shy about referencing their back catalogue. Apparently the game's tracks are peppered with images from their classic games like Galaxian spot of shoot-'em-up nostalgia there, and Pac-Man, Xevious, Bosconian, and even obscure platformer Mappy. Fair play to them, I suppose. The Scenic Routes section is all about the thrill of racing at 200 miles per hour, describing the tracks with their cityscapes, flybys, waterfalls and billboards flashing. Extended time. Sounds like a bit of sensory overload, but that's Ridge Racer for you. They mention a helicopter that can apparently zap you if you're slow charming. Auto attack is discussed next, talking about unlocking bonus cars by completing tracks. They mention you get given keys to new motors and imply some are a bit rubbish. The Tarati Terrific Renegade Expert Extra is called out as slow and handles like a wet cardboard box, which is a bit harsh in it. But then, some cars are always going to be lemons. They also warn about opponents smashing into you. Racing etiquette was never their strong suit in these games. Finally, the cars section highlights the variety of vehicles available, saying choosing the right car is key. They pick out a few examples. The Pac racing car, which is apparently the starting car of choice with good acceleration and top speed, and even has a picture of Pac-Man on the side subtle. Then there's the Assoluto Infinito, the car they used to conquer the Extreme Championships, boasting frightening top speed, best on straights apparently. Sounds like a beast. Overall, it's a decent preview, showcasing the different aspects of Ridge Racer 64. Looks like a solid arcade racer for the N64 if you were into that sort of thing back then. This page is all about Ridge Racer 64. It's giving us tips on how to win the Turner Prize event. They're going through the motions of taking corners, telling you to lift off the accelerator as you approach, turn in, and then slam the foot down again. Standard stuff really for Ridge Racer. Power sliding around corners is the name of the game. They even suggest touching the stick in the opposite direction to straighten up, and letting the car correct itself if you end up in a skid. Pretty basic driving advice if you ask me. Then there's a bit about the replay mode, saying it's all dreamy and hypnotic with motion blur. Remember those days before every game had a replay function? It felt quite novel at the time actually. They mention you can't save your best circuit, which is a bit of a shame, but it replays your last race in demo mode until you turn off the N64, which is something at least. There's also a small section on the side praising Reiko Nagase, calling her the lovely Reiko Nagase, and how she makes an appearance in Ridge Racer 64. They say she's infamous for tiptoeing between the revving cars in the intro. A bit much, but she was a bit of a video game icon back then, wasn't she? Down at the bottom they've got blurbs for 2 of the cars. The Age Solo Supernova, which they call a Batmobile and say it scuppers your chances, being disappointing to drive due to low acceleration, despite looking good. Then there's the Extreme Green, calling it an unholy hybrid of car and motorbike, with zero grip, but fast, and with silky handling. They reckon Mr. Green is easier to handle than faster cars. Each to their own, I suppose. Everyone had their favourites back then. All in all, a fairly standard tips page for Ridge Racer 64. This page is about Ridge Racer 64. Seems like a preview or review. It's headlined Wheel Suite and talks about the multiplayer aspects. They reckon it avoids being a blurry mess, which was a common complaint about N64 multiplayer back then, especially in races. They highlight 4 player modes. Race mode is standard battle mode and multi-lap races. Team mode is interesting with teams of 2 or 3 drivers controlled by players or CPU, and screen layout offers different configurations including a letterbox which is smaller but better looking apparently, and they say frame rate is fine in all modes. There's a section called What the Me, which is funny, about a glitch or secret feature where if you flip your car around at the start of a Grand Prix race and hit the wall, you suddenly go full speed in mirror mode and get a new car if you win. Typical cheeky game secrets from back then, wasn't it? What? Then it goes on about how Ridge Racer 64 mixes tracks from all 4 PlayStation Ridge Racer games: Original, Ridge Racer Revolution and Rage Racer, calling it the threequel, which is a bit of a made-up word if you ask me, but maybe they were trying to be clever. They mention improved handling, and it's faster and gorgeous. They're going on about how good the track design is, and how it has routes that snake around so you get different individual track layouts even with the same circuits, plus reversed versions. They mention World Driver Championship and TGR2 as games with lots of tracks, but Ridge Racer 64 is about quality rather than quantity, which I suppose is fair enough. They say it's a speed-drenched race from start to finish, comparing the feeling to F-Zero X and the speed of the Assoluto Infinito, which is always a good sign. Sounds like they're quite impressed with it overall. Good stuff. The next page covers Ridge Racer 64, and it's a right corker of a review, giving it a massive 91%. It's got screenshots showing off the game's speed. They reckon it feels properly fast even at 200 miles per hour, which for the N64 was pretty nippy back then. They've got a pluses and minuses box, saying the good bits are the heart-stopping speed, masterly track design, and dreamlike handling, perfect for a quick blast. But the downsides are the Grand Prix mode being a bit short, and a lack of tracks. Bit of a mixed bag then, but mostly good. There's a section, If You Like This, recommending World Driver Championship, saying it's less immediate than Ridge Racer 64, but still stunning, which is fair enough. World Driver Championship was a looker. They've broken down the scores: 9 for visuals and mastery, 8 for sounds and lifespan, which is solid. The overall verdict calls it a perfectly crafted marvel, and one of the N64's most exhilarating games. Pretty strong stuff, and back then we all knew Ridge Racer was always a slick arcade racer, and on the N64 it looked like they nailed it. Good times. This page is about Battlezone 64, and they're asking if it's as good as Quake and Command & Conquer, which are pretty big games to be comparing it to, aren't they? Apparently they've already had a go at the multiplayer in a previous issue, and weren't that impressed, saying it was a bit slow and not much fun. This bit here is a tutorial on how to play the Attack and Destroy mission, walking you through the steps of building a scout, sending a recycler to a geyser to draw energy, getting a wingman, and then attacking an enemy drone. It's all broken down into 6 numbered steps with screenshots, like a proper guide for new players. There's also an info burst box with the usual game details. It's from Crave, a 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, uses a page of controller pack memory, and Rumble Pack is supported. Looks like no cartridge save, password save, expansion or transfer packs on this one. It was out now in the UK and US at the time, costing £40, which was standard price for a new N64 game then. Japan was still waiting for it, mind. So they're showing you how to play, but that earlier comment about the multiplayer being slow does make you wonder if it's really going to live up to those comparisons to Quake and Command & Conquer. We'll see what they reckon. This page is all about Battlezone 64, or Zone 64 as they've styled it here, under a headline that screams, "The harder they come." It seems they're breaking down the different ways you can play this tank battler. Green, sir. First up is arcade mode, which they say is just basic blasting. Enemies get harder, but apparently it's a bit tedious and not exactly riveting. Sounds like a bit of a throwaway mode, to be honest. Then there's pilot mode, which they reckon is the main game. Proper story missions, needing a bit of strategy. Apparently you can play as the Americans, or these mysterious black dog rebels, so that's a bit of variety. They've stuck a caption next to a screenshot saying, "Plenty of vehicles to order about, here. Yowsa. Yowsa? Bit much, lads. Commander's mode is for the proper strategists, they say. Expert level, ordering troops, protecting your recycler. That's the unit that builds vehicles from scrap, apparently. Sounds like proper resource management, the kind of thing strategy fans would be into. Borington. There's a bit about multiplayer race mode, which they're not too keen on. Tank racing on a featureless moon surface? Sounds a bit dull if you ask me, especially as they say it's hard to know where you're going. Utter dump is their charming description. Visually, they're not pulling any punches, calling the graphics muddy and lacking in detail, smothered in fog. Basically, they're saying it's not a looker, but they concede it's a good game underneath. It was probably a bit ambitious trying to cram a PC strategy game onto the N64 cartridge, wasn't it? They make a point about Quake 2 being the best PC conversion on the N64, and then mention Command & Conquer and Duke Nukem 64 as decent, while slagging off Carmageddon 64, calling it execrable. Ouch. Poor Carmageddon. Then they're pondering where Battlezone 64 fits in amongst all that. They reckon the original PC game was sprawling and impressive, but squeezing all that strategy and first-person shooter action onto the N64 was always going to be a challenge. It sounds like they appreciate what they tried to do, even if the visuals are a bit rough around the edges. There are captions dotted about next to screenshots, like, an enemy gun tower. They can move, you know. Your recycler can build extra vehicles from scrap. On the surface of the moon, the low gravity makes things a bit floaty. And dramatic ones like, Eagle's Nest 1 is being overrun, our forces are surrendering, and looks like you're being invaded here. It might be a good idea to launch a counterattack. All in all, sounds like Battlezone 64 is a decent game if you can look past the fog and muddy textures. This page is a review of Battlezone on the N64, calling it Mission Magic. It's focusing on the An Unexpected Connection mission from pilot mode. Right at the top, they've got the pluses and minuses. Pluses are, plenty to do, ingenious mixture of strategy and shooting, 3 different races, and lots of guns, tanks and action. Minuses are fiddly, variable graphics, slow, and not that involving. Variable graphics, yeah, that was a common thing back then. Some N64 games could look a bit rough. Then there's a bit that says, if you like this, and it mentions GoldenEye on the N64, saying it's the best first-person shooter ever, until Perfect Dark hits the shops anyway. GoldenEye, yeah, everyone loved GoldenEye. Perfect Dark was the one to watch out for back then. We all knew it was going to be something special. Best first player. The review itself is broken down into numbered mission points. It talks about finding alien relics, searching a volcano, waiting for reinforcements while Soviets attack, destroying incoming forces, dealing with lots of enemies and ejecting if your ship gets destroyed, and using a sniper rifle to nick an enemy vehicle. Sounds like a typical mission briefing for Battlezone, jumping between vehicles and trying to be sneaky. The reviewer reckons the visuals are muddy and a little fuzzy, with shocking fogging too. Yeah, fog was the N64's way of dealing with draw distance, wasn't it? Sounds are described as terrible church organ-style military tunes and various muted effects. Church organ tunes? That sounds a bit odd for a futuristic wargame. Mastery section says there's a lot in there, but it's not presented terribly well. Lifespan talks about 3 missions, 3 races, and different difficulty levels, saying they should see you through. 3 missions doesn't sound like a massive amount, even back then. The verdict section says it's sprawling and exhaustive, but curiously uninvolving, and nonetheless offers a slow but ultimately enjoyable experience. They give it a 73%. The reviewer says practically everything that made the PC original great is in there, but the execution is frequently ropey. They mention the sniper rifle being a bit too easy, and the controls being fiddly, but acknowledge the strategy element adds to the overall experience. They finish by saying it's a concerted effort, but never really takes off and won't replace Perfect Dark as the most played game of 2000. Bit harsh maybe, 73% isn't terrible, but they're right about Perfect Dark, that was in a different league. This page is a review for Battletanks Global Assault. Right then, another tank game for the N64. Can't say we were exactly short of them back then. Apparently the story is a bit daft. Something about a virus wiping out most of the female population, and now gangs in tanks are fighting over what's left. Sounds a bit dodgy, even for back then. The review seems to think the single player is a bit lightweight, just a series of battles really, but they are proper keen on the multiplayer. Says it's the standout feature, and you'll spend most of your time with your mates on it. There's a mention of different tanks, like the Rhino and Hornet, each with different weapons, missiles, plasma guns, flamethrowers, the usual tanky stuff. Levels are supposed to be decent, with bits based on real places like the White House and Eiffel Tower, which is a bit of alright. In the info box it says it's from 3DO, a 96 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, and only uses one page on the controller pack hack. Password saves are out the window, which is a bit pants, and no expansion or transfer pack hacks either. Rumble pack is in though, naturally. Looks like it's out now in the States, but we're waiting till April over here. Ringing up at £40, which was standard price at the time. Jas. The reviewer reckons it's a good multiplayer game, making proper use of the 4 controller ports, which is fair enough. That's what the N64 was all about really, getting your mates round for a bit of a blast. They seem to give it a thumbs up for multiplayer fun, but not so much for the single player. Sounds like a decent rental at least, if you fancy some tank mayhem with your mates after the pub. This page is a review of Battletank's global assault on the N64. Right then, battle tanks, I remember that. It's all about massive tank battles, pure and simple, total annihilation as they put it in big letters. They're talking about the different weapons you get, like guided missiles. Plasma bolt sounds a bit sci-fi, doesn't it? Flamethrower and swarmers. Flamethrower for burning buildings, classic. Warnings you get. They've got a pluses and minuses bit, saying it's ace fun with your mates, good weapons and levels, but the single player is a bit uninvolving and the graphics are a bit muddy. Muddy graphics on the N64? Well, that's hardly breaking news, is it? They say if you like this you might like Vigilante 8, which they reviewed in issue 28, and gave 74%. Bit of a dig there, saying this is better. The verdict is pretty glowing, calling it one of the best multiplayer games you can buy, especially if you've got a few mates to play with. They've given it a score of 81%, which is decent. They've also broken down the review into visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, all scoring quite well. Visually basic but fast. Sounds are military tunes, mastery and lifespan are high for multiplayer. Then there's a section called Attack, showing a little story of a multiplayer match between players called Martin, Timbo and Kitsy. Martin goes for guided missiles, Timbo retaliates with plasma bolts, Kitsy gets a teleport power-up, and Martin uses a flamethrower. Sounds like typical chaotic multiplayer fun, just the kind of thing for a bit of a laugh with your mates back in the day. This page features a review of Disney's Tarzan on the N64, and blimey, it's not a glowing one, is it? They've slapped a miserable 35% on it. The reviewer, Martin Kitts, is not holding back, calling it boring, boring, boring. Under pluses and minuses, they begrudgingly admit it's got pretty graphics and alrightish music, but then lay into it for soul-destroying gameplay, being frustrating, badly designed, and just plain rubbish. Ouch, lay into it. There's a bit that says, if you like this, and recommends Yoshi's Story, saying it's a proper 2D platformer made by people who knew what they were doing, which is a bit of a dig at Tarzan. In it, they break down the score with sections for visuals and sounds, both getting a decent 7 out of 10. Mastery gets a measly 2, saying games on the Atari VCS had more imagination. Lifespan gets a 3, because it's easy to finish thankfully, so you won't be stuck with it for long. The verdict is brutal, calling it a total waste of time, and suggesting you'd be better off seeing the film instead. There's a funny little box called Monkey Murderer, which points out the irony of Tarzan, supposedly Lord of the Jungle, carving up monkeys in the game. They even show a screenshot of young Tarzi, about to amputate some tail of a lemur. Charming. The infoburst box gives you the usual details. Activision as the publisher, 64 megabit cartridge, 1 player, controller pack and cartridge save, no expansion or rumble pack needed. Apparently it was out now, in both the US and UK for 40 quid. Imagine paying 40 quid for this back then. They compare it to Pandemonium and Crash Bandicoot, but clearly not in a good way. They reckon it plays like it was designed for the PlayStation, which I guess is supposed to be an insult for an N64 game. Ha! Overall it's a proper panning of Tarzan. Sounds like one to avoid, even back then. This page is all about Cyber Tiger Woods Golf on the N64, and the title really says it all. Mario Golf without the Mario. Or seemingly golf. It's quite a brutal summary right there. Before you've even read the review, they've got a section called Got the Power, highlighting the power-ups you can earn in the game if you play under par. These sound a bit daft, but typical for the time. There's the rocket for extra distance, skimmer to bounce over water hazards, wind cutter to ignore the wind, and spin to adjust the ball in mid-air. Sounds like they're trying to inject some arcade fun into a golf game, which, well, could be interesting or could be a bit naff. Dinton. The info burst gives you the basic details. It's from EA, so you know it's got the Tiger Woods branding. Cart size is 96 megabits, which was pretty standard. It's 1 or 2 players, saves to the controller pack, and surprisingly, it's out now in the UK and US, but not in Japan yet. RRP is £40, which was a fair whack for a game back then. No Rumble Pack support, which is a bit of a shame, and no expansion pack or transfer pack stuff either. Standard fare, really. Mechas. The article itself talks about how EA were aiming to make a golf game somewhere between Mario Golf and a serious PGA sim. They signed Tiger Woods and got the PGA license, so they clearly meant business. Sapphire, who did Rainbow Six and Rally 2, were developing it, so they had some pedigree. The reviewer does say something went wrong in the mix though. Apparently, all the golfers in the game speak with a Rain Man voice, which sounds absolutely terrible and hilarious at the same time. They also moan about the power meter being flawed and making the 18 holes a bit too easy. They concede that the analog stick control as a virtual club is decent and gives you control over shot length, but overall it sounds a bit of a mixed bag, leaning towards a bit of a disappointment. There's a screenshot of the game with a little caption saying Tiger's swing and stance are motion captured for realism. A nice touch, apparently. So yeah, Cyber Tiger Woods Golf sounds like it tried to be a bit different but maybe missed the mark. Mario Golf comparisons are never kind when you're aiming for something serious-ish. This page is a review feature on Cyber Tiger Woods Golf for the N64, taking the form of a sort of tutorial guide, which is a bit of a weird format for a review, innit? Right then, so the article titled Swing It On walks you through the basics of the game step by step, and it's clear from the get-go they aren't completely sold on it, saying it works on percentages and it's not particularly good. The first few steps are about teeing off, adjusting your arc standard golf stuff. Then it gets into the power meter, which uses percentages, not yards, which the reviewer immediately flags as a bit rubbish. Step 4 shows a comically overpowered shot flying way over the green. Classic. Apparently 90% power is trouble, and you should aim for 66% for a second stab at it, whatever that means in golf terms, probably just another shot, right? They then talk about putting and how the yellow arrow guides your direction. It all sounds simple enough written down, but the reviewer's commentary hints at frustrations. There's a pluses and minuses box. Pluses are great courses, inventive power-ups, top battle game, and Rain Man voice samples. Rain Man? Oh, they mean like the movie. Dustin Hoffman-style voice clips. Hilarious, if a bit naff. Minuses are terrible power meter, bland visuals, and mind-numbing music. Sounds like a mixed bag already. Then there's an if you like this section, recommending Mario Golf on the N64, saying it's a Nintendo triumph again, so they are clearly pushing Mario Golf as the better golf game. They've got these little boxes rating visuals, sounds, mastery, and lifespan. Visuals get a 6, and are called better on later courses but consistently uninspiring and immensely humdrum. Ouch. Sounds get a 3, amusing voice samples, but the same 10 seconds of music throughout. Mastery gets a 7, mentioning big courses and smart motion capture, but disappointing to look at. Lifespan also gets a 7, with 3 courses, a fantastic battle mode, skins tournament, driving range. So content is there, but maybe not the polish. The verdict box gives it 72%. They call it basically a solid game, but say the failed experiment with the power meter means CyberTiger can only play second fiddle to Matza and EPGA. Matza probably means Jesper Parnevik's Matza Golf, and EPGA, the European PGA Tour games. So decent but not top of the leaderboard, seems to be the gist. The main text body complains about the analog stick power meter and how inconsistent percentages are. 75% power can send it flying 250 yards sometimes, and other times, not even good for a 10-yard putt typical. They mention the courses have checkered trousers and tees, and stealth bomber tees, which sounds a bit wacky. Overall it's a game with some ideas, but the core mechanic of the power meter is a right pain in the backside it seems. They end up feeling distinctly lukewarm, which is British understatement for a bit rubbish but could be worse. Tim Weaver is the reviewer, if anyone's interested. This page is a review for Jeremy McGrath Supercross 2000 on the N64. Right off the bat, it's got a pluses and minuses section. Pluses are track editor, it being an acclaimed game without fogging, and 16 courses. Minuses are apparently most of which are boring, relentlessly boring, and stinky visuals. Charming. They highlight the track editor feature, calling it track for good, saying it's like Acclaim's Revolt but with less space for crazy track pieces, more just jumps and bumps and hairpins. Still fun to piece together they reckon, and the best feature of the game apparently. The main review title is Mud Spattering Supercross Action. Yawn. Seems like the reviewer, Tim Weaver, isn't too impressed. He mentions it's another mind-numbingly dull game and looks the same as others. They were expecting it to be at least as good as EA's Supercross 2000, which they reviewed last issue, and gave 76%. But no, Apparently Jeremy McGrath's is boring with no challenge, visually poor, and only saving grace is passable controls. They mention 16 courses split between Supercross and Motocross, both supposedly offering less than enthralling gaming, but Motocross has a few unexpected twists and high jumps where you can do stunts. The visuals section is brutal, looks like a Mega Drive conversion, and a not particularly good one at that. Ouch. Sounds mentions The Offspring on the menu screen, and then the haunting sound of Flymos, which, well, take that as you will. Mastery says the track editor is good, if not great, but otherwise the N64 is hardly used in the game. Lifespan says there are plenty of options, but it's just yawnsome. The verdict box asks, Jeremy McGrath is so enormously monotonous that even the Americans couldn't like it, or could they? They gave it a score of 53%. Not great then. It's mentioned in the info burst that it's 64 megabits cart size, 1 to 4 players, needs 12 pages of controller pack memory, cartridge save, no password save, Rumble Pack compatible, but no expansion or transfer pack support. It was out in April, in both the UK and US, and cost £40, warrantinal. Overall, sounds like a bit of a stinker really. Just another average, acclaimed sports title at the time, not exactly setting the world on fire. We'd seen worse, mind you, but definitely not one to rush out and buy based on this review. Shame really, McGrath was a big name. This page is all about Vigilante 8, Second Offense, the sequel, and it's showing off some of the new stuff they've crammed in. Apparently they previewed this game back in issue 37, which is a bit of a tease. It's talking about all-terrain training, which sounds a bit daft, but basically means your cars can now transform to handle different terrains like hover, ski, and even swim. Hover mode is for muddy ground and shallow water, ski mode is for snow levels giving you more grip, and swim mode, which sounds the most bonkers, is for the Florida level with propellers to navigate water and avoid sharks. Sharks in a car game, brilliant. There are screenshots of the game, one with explosions, classic Vigilante 8 chaos, another showing off some lens flare in a steelworks level, and another where you can shoot down an airplane, which is always satisfying. There's an info burst box on the side, which is standard stuff. Developer Activision, cart size 128 megabits, up to 4 players, only needs 1 page on the controller pack, which is good news. Password save is out, cartridge save is out, expansion pack and transfer pack are out, Rumble Pack is in, which is a must for a game like this. It says it's out now in the US and UK, and TBA for Japan, and the cost is £40, which was pretty standard price back then. Overall, it seems like they are trying to build on the original Vigilante 8 formula, with more vehicle transformations and levels, classic over-the-top action, typical Vigilante 8 really, and from the sounds of it they are pretty impressed. This page is a review of Vigilante 8, Second Offense on the N64, and it seems like they're giving a walkthrough for one of the missions too. It's set in the Louisiana swamps, and you're playing as John Torque, who they playfully call a badass chap. The walkthrough is numbered, step by step, like those old guides they used to do. First off, you need to grab 2 briefcases, protect some tombs, and take out all the enemies. Then there's a shortcut through a mansion. You can even go upstairs apparently. If you fancy crossing the swamps, you can pick up a propeller icon to drive on water. Up at the tombs, you drive into mausoleums to get the briefcases. Once you're up high, enemies will come for you, so you need to draw them away from the tombs to fight them. Finally, John Torque's car has a special weapon, a 6-shot gun with explosive rounds, handy for those swamp battles. Warg. Org. On the side, there's a pluses and minuses box. The good bits are loads of cars, big levels with detail, plenty of weapons, and decent multiplayer. The minuses are that it's frequently boring, the combat is inaccurate, the physics are floaty, and it's not much different from the original Vigilante 8. They've got a little if you like this section recommending Destruction Derby 64. Remember that one? Good old THQ. They say it's like smashing cars to pieces in this so-so PlayStation update, which is a bit harsh on Second Offense already. The main review text goes on about how the first Vigilante 8 was surprisingly good, considering its simple premise. They mention the weapons, the cars, the highest graphics for the time, and the analog control. They even liked the N64 exclusive level. But this sequel, Second Offense, isn't really bringing anything new to the table, like they saw with Mario Party 2. They're not saying that's always bad, but they point out that Luxoflux and no Nintendo, a bit of a dig there. They reckon targeting enemies is tough, leading to just frantic button mashing and missing a lot. The missions are all pretty similar, just collecting briefcases and that sort of thing. They mention different cars, including a motorbike and sidecar, which sounds a bit naff. They say the levels are barren but pretty, and they're huge, from Utah to Louisiana, and even a rocket launch in Florida, which sounds a bit bonkers. The handling is loose, making combat a bit messy, Apparently the levels have detail but there's noticeable pop-up. The sounds are alright, vehicle effects are good, but the music is dreadful. They give it a mastery score of 6 out of 10, saying it shows its PlayStation roots, but the graphics and 4-player make up for some lack of pizzazz. Lifespan gets a 6 too, saying it gets boring quickly but multiplayer extends it. Katana. The verdict is, Second Offense is a slightly tweaked version of an okayish game we've seen before. They say it's more Vigilante 8, with exaggerated physics and simple gameplay which is just needless and dull. Handling is too loose, and combat engagements are tiring. They mention the dump truck ability to compact enemy cars is amusing, and the propulsion systems are a significant addition. Technically it's fine, especially in the expansion pack enhanced hires mode. They conclude that Activision are trying to sell Vigilante 8 for your money again, and it's just pretty average, giving it a 61% score. Fun in brief spurts. Second Offense is simply too similar to the original, and too frustrating, to really succeed. File under average. Bit of a lukewarm review then, wasn't it? Guess it wasn't setting the world on fire back in April 2000. This page is the cover of a magazine. Looks like it's all about the Nintendo 64. Right at the top it says Total Game Service for Nintendo 64 owners, so no mistaking what this is about then. The main headline is plastered all over the place for ECW Hardcore Revolution, with a rather imposing wrestler fella staring out. Seems they've got a playing guide for that inside. There's a bunch of other bits listed too, like a Club 64 mailbox for letters, a how-to guide to be top banana at Donkey Kong 64, another how-to for getting started in Toy Story 2, and Tipsy Extra for GoldenEye 007. Blimey, GoldenEye still getting tips in 2000, that game was ancient even then, but still a classic I suppose. There's also something called Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, about sore gaming backs, bit of a laugh. Maybe they should have suggested stretching a bit more. Game On is there, which probably means reader challenges. I Am the Best for DK64 and Smash Bros. Times those speedrunners were always a different breed, weren't they? And Skill Club 64 inches listings, plus a directory and back issues info. Looks like it's the April 2000 issue. Good times. This page is the mailbox section, right? Always a bit of a laugh to see what people were moaning about or praising. It's issue 40 of N64 Magazine, from April 2000. At the top, they've got a bit of a silly intro about Larry Lurex, the Spice Girls and Dino and Martin making an appearance in Club 64, whatever that means. Then there's the usual magazine info, address in Bath, phone and fax numbers, and the N64 at futurenet.co.uk email address, which is proper retro now. It says the N64 star letter wins a steering wheel with rumble effect, a proper bit of kit back then. The editorial team are listed as Tim Weaver as editor, Jess Bickham, Andrea Ball, Will Overton, Justin Webb, Martin Kitts and Mark Green, some names I remember from back in the day. The star letter is from someone complaining about Donkey Kong 64 costing 60 quid, which was a lot, and also having to buy the expansion pack on top. He says he argued with Nintendo customer support and eventually they offered him a free game, either 1080 Snowboarding or Twisted Edge, which isn't a bad result for complaining, is it? Good old Nintendo power, eh? There's a little picture of Donkey Kong looking a bit cheeky with some symbols. There's a correction corner section. First one is, Almost Ed about getting Banjo-Tooie's name wrong. Someone called it Banjo-Tootie. Easy mistake to make, they admit. Then moving on. Ed about someone saying you need all 4 secret characters to get Mew in Pokemon on N64 37ths, but the editor corrects them saying you only need 3. And finally, just great. Ed where someone points out they said you were fighting a Pinsir in Pokemon Stadium but it should have been Goldeen. The editor admits they got it wrong. Again, they seem to be getting a bit of stick in this issue. Next letter is Larry Lurex where someone is annoyed because the magazine didn't know who Todd Rundgren was when they were talking about music in a previous issue, referencing Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell. Showing off a bit, aren't they? The last letter is Awful Lot, where a reader reckons the helicopter in James Bond film You Only Live Twice looks like the gyrocopter from Pilot Wings. Bit of a random spot that, but fair enough. The editor's reply is just a bit sarcastic. At the bottom is the Future Publishing bit, saying they are part of the Future Network and publish loads of magazines and websites. Yeah, we know, it was everywhere back then. And the page number 74 for issue 40. Nothing majorly exciting on this page, just the usual reader feedback and corrections really. This page is the Club 64 mailbox, the letters page then. Someone called Cunning is writing in about Nintendo's marketing for Pokemon Yellow, reckons it was clever how they showed Togepi before the game was even out. Ed, the editor, is being a bit sarcastic, saying it was more like good luck than cunning. Then there's Identical, someone confirming that the Zelda theme tune on the title screen is the same as the whistle from Super Mario Bros. 3. Always thought they sounded a bit similar myself. Ed just confirms it again. Oh. Next up is Rude, and this fella wants the new Dolphin, which we all know is the GameCube, to have 18 rated games with all sorts of adult stuff. Ed's having a laugh saying, well actually no, bit cheeky. Face Off is about ISS Millennium, the footy game. This reader, Matthew Hanna, suggests Konami should use the Game Boy camera to put your face in the game. Remember the Game Boy camera? Mad idea back then. Ed thinks it's a good shout, but points out, Perfect Dark binned the Game Boy camera feature because of pressure from the Yanks. Always ruining our fun, those Americans. Really. Speak Into is from Chris Almond, and he's thinking about WWF WrestleMania 2000 on the Dolphin, wanting to record your own commentary with a microphone. Not a bad idea actually. Ed agrees and thinks it would add to the game. Get Hold is a Zelda question. This reader is wondering how Link got Epona in Zelda Gaiden, which we know now is Majora's Mask, since it's supposed to be before Ocarina of Time. And did he know Malon before? Classic Zelda timeline head scratchers. Ed's just asking for answers. Down at the bottom, Dream On is a game idea for a Matrix beat-em-up. Like Tekken but with Neo, Trinity, Agent Smith, the lot. Running up walls and slow-motion bullets, the whole shebang. Adam Wayne came up with that one. Ed thinks it sounds good, especially if Rare did it. Now that would have been something. Lastly, Spice World 64, which is just as bonkers as it sounds. A Spice Girls beat-em-up, fighting bands like Steps and S Club 7. Canaire Bloomer is the mastermind. Ed's taking the mickey a bit, especially about the Spice Girls and S Club 7, but seems to find the idea amusing enough. There's a bit at the bottom saying, see this first S Clubber, pointing to the image next to it looks like some generic glamour shot. Right at the bottom it's asking for more game ideas, sending them to N64 Magazine in Bath. Good old days of sending letters to magazines. This page is the mailbox section, bonus letters, and So Tell Me This, classic stuff from N64 Magazine back in the day. In bonus letters, readers are writing in about various bits and bobs. Someone is talking about Teletubbies, then there's a funny one about hedgehogs not being little chimps, and someone else is asking about mental friends, whatever that's about. A bloke named Mark is complaining about GoldenEye controls, saying he hates the default Turok setup but ends up using it for all first-person shooters. He lists a bunch of games like Rainbow Six, South Park, Armorines and Jet Force, all games where you could tweak the controls, mind you. He's annoyed he can't just play games with GoldenEye controls, fair enough. Another letter is from Finland, asking about Rare making Dreamcast games, a bit of a rumour mill going on there, and Ed is saying it's strange because they've had a few questions about that. Then we've got So Tell Me This, which is the Q&A bit. First question is about the transfer pack release for Pokemon Stadium 2 and how much it will cost. Ed reckons April 7th and bundled with Pokemon Stadium 2, probably around 50 quid, which sounds about right for a big N64 release back then. Someone else is asking when Tony Hawk's skateboarding is coming, and if the Dolphin, that's the GameCube C, will have internet. Ed says maybe for Tony Hawk's an internet on Dolphin is possible, they're just guessing really. Another question asks about a Nintendo mouse and keyboard for Dolphin, not sure if that ever really took off properly, did it? Then someone is asking if Capcom will do a Dino Crisis 2 because they've brought out Resident Evil 2, which is a reasonable question. Ed says they might do a Dino version of RE2, playing on words there. Yee. Over in Crisis on the N64, someone's asking about Game Boy Advance games and cartridges, and Ed's saying Capcom's only N64 project is Resident Evil 0, not much else happening on the N64 front then, as everyone was looking ahead to the Dolphin. Last question is about ISS Millennium and Ronaldo Soccer. Ed says ISS is still April time. According to Konami, and Ronaldo Soccer got canned, which isn't too surprising, maybe it wasn't up to scratch. There's a little picture with Dino and Martin toys. They reckon it's a foreign ripoff of Mario and Yoshi, and they're calling it a cheapo foreign ripoff. They also mention Mario's changing personality on the Dolphin, being called Martin and Yoshi being Dino, bit of a weird direction they were hinting at there. This page, titled The N64 Board, seems to be all about what readers reckon Nintendo's next console, Dolphin, might look like. It's a Dolphin factory section where folks have sent in their ideas for the console's design. We've got Chris Lowe from Tyne and Ware musing about the Dolphin controller, reckons it might look like this odd thing he's drawn. Looks interesting, listen. Right you are, Chris. Then there's Maximum Mark Joliffe from Devon, who's gone for a swish-looking console/movie player combo. Sounds a bit ambitious, Mark. Movie player, eh? Bit ahead of your time there, mate. Michael Everett from Bristol has sent in a 3-piece Dolphin Ideas Fest, so he's really gone to town on it. Looks like he's got a separate console, controller, and something else. Guess easy, a portable CD player? Good effort, Michael. Guess easy. And finally, Simon Clark from Evesham has done a computer-drawn design, piece of desktop technology. Boy, what a beauty. he reckons. Bit boxy, Simon, but hey, at least you've used a computer. Very 2000 joie. The rest of the page is the board section, with reader drawings pinned up. There's Bouncy Jack from Tetrasphere, by James Ashworth from Cheshire. Fair play for remembering Tetrasphere, bit of an oddball game that one. Mario the Tubster, from Holland, cheers to Cheered Van Diemte for that. Bit of a strange Mario that one. John Barber from Sheffield sent in a picture of young Link, nice enough drawing, and there's some N64 characters drawn by J. Dingby, Pikachu, Kirby, Rayman, Norangi, and Darunia from Zelda Ocarina of Time, drawn by Ian Ellis from Wrexham. Top stuff apparently. Right then. This page is a how-to guide, right in the thick of Club 64, for ECW Hardcore Revolution. Remember that one? It's all about how to power slam your way through it, getting ready to lay the maximum amount of smackdown. It's written by Daniel Glenfield. They've got a What We Said box, reminding us they reviewed it in the last issue, issue 39. Apparently they thought it was comprehensive and authentic, which is fair enough for an ECW game, I suppose, but lacking in improvements and a big name license. Bit of a backhanded compliment really, but they still gave it a solid 80%. Not bad at all. Then it's into the On the Canvas section, with tips for getting the upper hand. Full Advantage talks about using running elbow drops and stomps when your opponent's health is low. Classic wrestling stuff really. Hold/submission is about using the D-pad for submission moves, tapping A to make them hurt more, which was pretty standard fare back then. And lastly, Splash Down, which reminds you to climb the turnbuckle for a splash when your opponent is down and out. Good old high-flying action, well as high-flying as the N64 could manage with those graphics, bless it. It's all about getting the wrestlers smacked down. Yeah, those were the days of button-bashing wrestling games, good fun if a bit rough around the edges. This page is from the Club 64 how-to section, and it's all about getting to grips with wrestling games, specifically ECW Hardcore Revolution it seems. They're running through the basics in the workshop, like blocking, which they say is unnecessary against the computer, but handy for player versus player scraps. Then it's on to ready moves, grappling, high-risk stuff and extra maneuvers. All standard wrestling game fare really. Below that, they've got rated wrestlers, focusing on some of the lads in ECW Hardcore Revolution. They've picked out Raven, Taz, Rhino, AXL, Rotten and Dreamer, talking about their best moves and finishes. Raven's double arm DDT is apparently top-notch, and his snapmare is reliable. Taz has his reverse Tiger Tazplex and a headlock takedown which is a safe bet. Rhino's spinning neckbreaker and short arm clothesline are mentioned, and for AXL Rotten, it's the Gorilla Press Slam and one-handed choke slam. Finally there's Dreamer with his big head punch and fallaway slam. Each wrestler has a finisher move listed too, like Raven's Evenflow DDT, Tazmission for Taz, Sit-Out Piledriver for Rhino, SST for AXL Rotten, and Dreamer DDT for Dreamer. Seems like they're trying to give you a leg up if you're just starting out with this wrestling malarkey. This page is all about playing dirty and career mode tactics in ECW Hardcore Revolution. Cheeky stuff really. Playing dirty goes through some underhanded tactics, like the low blow for when you're down, the sidestep attack to avoid high-risk moves, corner post terror which sounds a bit over the top, using your opponent as a weapon against the corner post, bit brutal even for ECW. Then there's what big arms you have, focusing on wrestlers with longer reach. That's a bit obvious, isn't it? And the surprise takedown for a quick running attack. All good for getting one over on your mates, especially if they're playing fair. Then we get into career mode how-to. For one-on-one matches, it's all about getting stuck in straight away with your ready moves, weakening them with slams and chokes before going for the bigger grapples. Number 2 is about submission holds when your health is low, using the D-pad and A button to get your foe to give up, cheesy but effective. And finally, pin them when their health bar goes red, and remember your finisher for style of course. What? The tag team section, well, it says your partner is a bit thick and needs telling when to come into the ring. Some partners are like that in games, aren't they? To call for help, you tap R and bottom C. Can do it anytime apparently. Always pin in your own corner for extra time, and don't forget about your partner waiting outside if your strength is low, tag them in to keep fighting. Solid tips really, if a bit basic. ECW Hardcore Revolution, it was alright, a bit rough around the edges, but good for a laugh with your mates. This page is all about how to get the most out of ECW Hardcore Revolution on the N64. Right then, it kicks off with three-way matches, pointing out it's not last man standing, it's all about who can pin someone first. Smart move they suggest is to hang back a bit and let the other two blokes beat each other up before you get involved. Makes sense, less hassle for you, innit? Then it moves on to Toon 1 matches, and they're talking about this glitch that was knocking around since Warzone, where you press L to switch between the two opponents. Apparently it's still in this game. They're saying to use that to your advantage and stick in some neck breakers. Bit cheesy, but hey, whatever works. Cheshire. Next up is Tornado or four-way dance matches, which are basically 2-2 no tags. Proper carnage, as they say. Good tip is to watch out for your partner and jump in to stop them getting pinned. And they mention the AI switches targets a lot, so keep an eye on that L button. If you're getting annoyed with someone not playing ball, running dropkicks or a rear grapple with left C from behind are your go-tos. Quick decisions though, mind. 3-on-1 matches are next, and here's a cheeky tactic. Apparently you can win by count-out, not just by beating everyone up. So the advice is to get one bloke outside, keep him there, give him a kicking, and wait for the timer to nearly run out, then nip back in the ring for the easy win. Bit cheap, but effective. Lumberjack matches are covered too, with all those extra wrestlers milling about outside the ring. Clever trick is to stay away from the edge of the ring, otherwise those lumberjacks will try and drag you out. And if you grab someone, just fling them out into the waiting crowd. Sounds like fun. Warigi. Lastly, cage matches. Apparently all cage matches, even tornado ones, work the same way. First one to touch the arena floor outside the cage wins. To escape, you gotta climb up, and then hit down and top C when your strength bar is red. Bit fiddly that. They recommend smacking your opponent into the cage wall to make them bleed. Hardcore, eh? And if someone tries to escape in a tornado match, hold down and top C to rattle the cage and knock them back down. Classic. So yeah, that's how to power slam your way through ECW Hardcore Revolution, according to this magazine. This page is a how-to guide for Donkey Kong 64 multiplayer, telling you how to be the top banana and chimpress your friends. It's from N64 Magazine, issue 40, which takes me right back to the year 2000. They're giving tips on how to dominate in the multiplayer mode. Warrington Norcus. They gave Donkey Kong 64 a massive 93% in their review, saying Rare had even bettered Banjo-Kazooie, which is high praise indeed, considering how good Banjo was back then. Maybe a bit over the top, but hype was hype back then. The article is all about arena power-ups for the multiplayer battles, and they've got a rundown of all the goodies you can grab during a single-screen battle. First up is the orange power-up, a fiery wall that spreads across the arena. They suggest dodging it by standing at the opposite end of the screen, or getting closer to the screen so you don't get knocked off. Sounds a bit chaotic, just what you'd expect from a monkey brawl. Then there's the yellow banana, which gives you a burst of speed for 5 seconds. They say it usually sends you skidding into oblivion, so avoid it, or run in a circle to avoid a fall if you accidentally grab it. Bit of a risk/reward then. Next is the ammo box, giving you 5 bullets which can knock your mates around. They recommend using the Z trigger for aiming. Classic N64 controls there. The blue banana freezes your opponents indefinitely, unless they waggle their sticks to escape. They say to use the third part, which I guess refers to your third banana. Cheeky. The crystal makes you a giant monkey for 5 seconds, letting you squash anyone in your path. Very handy, as they say. Finally, there's the power-up, which could be any of the above, or it could be shrink, where you need to scamper in a wide circle to avoid being flattened. Reverse controls, where you need to look for the telltale skid to avoid falling off. Or slow, where you should stick to the edges, and pursuers will run past you into the ether. Sounds like a right old laugh actually. Chaotic power-ups. Just the kind of thing for a bit of N64 multiplayer mayhem. This page offers tips to become a top banana in Donkey Kong 64 battle mode, which was quite the craze back then. It starts by running through the ammo types. Gun ammo is your standard stuff, just gobble it up. Homing ammo is a mixed bag, best used at a distance. Orange grenades explode on bounce, so lob them from above, and they've even got a subtle homing effect, which is a bit fancy. Hands and feet, that's your melon chomping attack, useful up close, Cruanaya. They reckon for arena battles, Lanky or Chunky are your best bet. Surprisingly, Chunky's quick. But for battle mode, apparently Donkey Kong with his speed-boosting leg kick is the way to go. Camera control is key, they say. Flicking R is a last resort and frantic C button tapping is needed to keep enemies in view, which is fair enough. The camera in DK64 could be a right pain sometimes. Then there's 8 winning tactics. Warp pads are ammo hotspots. And camping on the exit is a bit cheeky, stopping others getting through. Circle strafing is near impossible, but flicking left and right after a hit can help you find panicked enemies. Underwater moats are power-up havens and escape routes. Sniping isn't that effective, as people just use homing ammo anyway. Acrobatics, jumping into other monkeys. A bit silly, but they say it works. Auto-fire is a must. Ammo's everywhere in DK64, so no excuse not to keep firing. Certain Donkey Kong attacks, like his B-button leg kick, give a turbo boost, which is handy. And lastly, use height to your advantage for attacks and escapes. All pretty standard stuff for the time, but good to know if you were just starting out in the DK64 battle arenas. The next page is a guide on how to get started in Toy Story 2, classic film time game on the N64. It's got tips for finding Bo Peep's sheep. Seems like they've gone and got themselves lost in Andy's house. Typical. There's two sections, in the loft and in the living room, with screenshots to help you out. Shimmy up to the loft using the pot plant. It says in the loft section, honestly. Sometimes these guides were a bit too obvious, weren't they? There's a little what we said box too, reminding us they reviewed Toy Story 2 in issues 39. Apparently they thought it was likeable and imaginative, and a solid, hard-working 3D adventure. Bit generic praise if you ask me, but fair enough. They gave it a 71%, which back then for a film game wasn't actually bad, could be a lot worse, especially compared to some of the dire film tie-ins we've seen over the years. This page is a how-to guide for Toy Story 2 on the N64, classic stuff. It's showing you how to find these misplaced soldiers in Andy's neighborhood, a bit like a treasure hunt. First up, in the basement, you're leaping over green goo and climbing boxes to reach shelves. Typical platforming stuff really. Then it's in the garage, using boxes, spades and dustbins to get onto the car roof, probably to reach some high-up soldier. They always put them in weird places. Next, in the kitchen, using a bin, fridge and kitchen scales to navigate the countertops, you know the sort of thing, shrinking down and the kitchen becomes a massive level. Clever idea really. Finally, Andy's neighborhood, which is split into the yard, by the car, and by the pool. In the yard, you're dealing with molehills and firing flares to catch a soldier. By the car, involves stomping car wheels and jumping onto washing lines. Those washing lines are always tricky in games. By the pool, you're using chairs and palm trees to reach a soldier hidden in a vase. Toy Story 2 was a big deal back then. Everyone loved the films, and the games were usually decent platformers, especially on the N64. These guides were always handy when you got stuck. No internet walkthroughs back then, you had to rely on magazines like this or ask your mates. Good times. This page is showing a walkthrough for Toy Story 2 on the N64, specifically for finding all the hidden workmen in the construction yard level. It's laid out like a proper guide, showing you step by step with pictures where to go. Remember Toy Story 2 on the N64? It was a decent platformer back then, proper good fun for the kids. And even for us older gamers if we're honest. This guide is breaking down how to find all these little weebles, or workmen as they call them, scattered about the level. It's got sections like on the swings, on the tree, in the hut, in the tractor, and on the girder. All the classic places you'd expect to be jumping around in as Buzz Lightyear. It's quite detailed, telling you things like, leap over the hurtful green ooze in the hut. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Seems like they're trying to help you get every last collectible in the level. For those completionists out there, I remember these guides being pretty handy back in the day, especially for games like this where there was loads to find. Good times? This page is all about cheat codes for GoldenEye 007 on the N64, classic stuff. Remember all the rumors and playground talk about secret characters and mad modes? Turns out, Dr. Ian was the magnificent bloke who dug these out. They're calling them complicated codes, which is a bit of an understatement, more like a sequence of finger gymnastics involving shoulder buttons and the C buttons and D-pad all at once, but back then we were dedicated, right? So, what have we got? There are codes for extra characters on the character select screen, fair enough. Always good to have more chaps to play as. All guns, naturally. Who wouldn't want that in multiplayer? Max ammo, goes hand in hand with all guns really. There's line mode, sounds a bit mysterious, maybe wireframe graphics? Invincibility, well, that's a standard cheat, isn't it? Pugu. Then we get into the weirder stuff. DK mode, now that's interesting. Donkey Kong mode in GoldenEye. Wonder what that does, probably makes everyone massive-headed like DK and Mario Kart, that was always a laugh. 2x grenade launcher and 2x rocket launcher, because one of each wasn't enough chaos, clearly. Turbo mode, speed things up, make it even more frantic. No radar, multi-cheat, for proper sneaky multiplayer games, gotta love that. Paintball mode, on the cheat screen itself, that's a fun twist, paint splatters everywhere. And another invincibility code, but this one's for during normal play, so campaign mode sorted then. There's a screenshot of what looks like the facility level, with the words, hostage executed, plastered across it. Bit grim, but that's GoldenEye for you. Yeah, cheat codes in GoldenEye. Proper late 90s gaming magic right there. This page is dedicated to cheats for GoldenEye on the N64. Proper classic that. It's got a load of cheat codes listed out for things like Tiny Bond, which was always a laugh, and 2x throwing knives and infinite ammo. All the usual suspects to make the game a bit of a giggle. They've got categories like 2x laser, all guns, Gol PP7, so you can get all the fancy weapons right from the start. It's headed up with a bit of a statement about how Perfect Dark is coming, rolling in for months, if not years they reckon, and that this is the time to bleed GoldenEye dry of cheats and quirks. Bit dramatic, but yeah, fair enough, we were all still playing GoldenEye, even when Perfect Dark was on the horizon. They've got a few screenshots dotted around to illustrate the cheats, I suppose, little reminders of what the game looked like. Just a solid page of cheat codes, exactly what you wanted back then. This page is all about Reader's Top Tips, classic stuff for the N64. It's headed Reader's Top 15 Tips, and they're giving away a Macopad controller, remember those? Bit gimmicky they were. First up, it's Cheat of the Month for Donkey Kong 64. Apparently if you're stuck for golden bananas to get into a new level, just use Lanky's Bree Button Attack by B-Locker's Face. Kerry Robbins from Wolverhampton sent that one in. Right next to it is Rainbow Six. For Rainbow Six, if you don't have a controller puck, those memory cards were always a pain. You can use a password TZT69QWFSW on the Quick Start menu to unlock all levels up to Deep Magic. Nick Curtis from Melksham is the genius behind that. Rah, rah. Then there's another Donkey Kong 64 tip. For the Jack-in-the-Box boss, apparently if you fall off the platforms and hang on the lift it takes you back up. Bit of a weird one. Eton Nat. Next it's Asteroid 64. Someone thought the programmers hadn't built the original asteroids into the game. Turns out they did, you just have to shoot the green thing on level 15. To play the black and white Atari version. David Clark, who sent that in via email, sounds like he figured that out. Ru'u. Moving on, there's WWF WrestleMania 2000. Before your opponent tags in their partner, if you run at the partner you'll knock them. Simple but effective, I guess. Then Knockout Kings 2000. For easy training points in career mode, choose Muhammad Ali, go to the training area, and hold down top C while standing next to the trainer. James Johnston from Wokingham found that nugget. Another Donkey Kong 64 tip, they are popular. In a race against the beetle in Angry Aztec or Crystal Caves, roll forward into the oversized insect, and it slows down. Laura Ashford from Bromsgrove is sharing that. Top Gear Rally 2 is next. If you want to play through without damage or losses you can press L, Z, Start, and up on the D-pad twice during the main game. Jamie Davis from Leicester shared that one. Key. Bow. Then another Rainbow Six tip. On the mission Deep Magic, if you throw a flashbang near the helipad floor and stare down, bizarrely, the doors close and the guards stand still. Joe Ambrose from Cheshire found that one. Jet Force Gemini is next. If you shoot an adult tribal once, it'll follow you, shoot it again, and it stops. You can rearrange tribals or make a Pied Piper style group. Gordon Bennett from Taunton is suggesting tribal manipulation. Rugu. NHL Breakaway 99 is next. When you score a goal and start celebrating, wiggle the analog stick, and you'll be able to move your skater. Kyle McLean from Inverness sent that in. Huijaw. Donkey Kong 64 again, this time for multiplayer. If one Kong is stationary while the other jumps on top, they'll perform an acrobatic act. Will Wilmot from Somerset is the tipster for that one. Bore again. Duke Nukem 64 level cheat. Press RL, bottom C right up, and top C in the cheat menu, then start a deathmatch to access Noctis Labyrinth. Tom Magnus from Powys found that. 2E. Top Gear Rally 2 again. Turns out there's a useless tip to turn the world upside down. Press top C, Z, start, up and down on the D-pad, and the screen flips. Richard Sweeney from Ross-on-Wye sent that in. Who even needs that? Richer. Lastly, Zelda 64, Ocarina of Time. As young Link at night, cross the small bridge outside Kakariko village, and you'll see a suicide skeleton jumping off the bridge. Grim. David Bristol from Birmingham is sharing that morbid delight. At the bottom there's a one last time section about GoldenEye, for an old tip revisited by popular demand, to activate all weapons then zoom in with the sniper rifle on the runway to see floating guards. Classic GoldenEye glitches. JT. There's also a form to send in your own top tip to Tips Extra, N64 Magazine at an address in Bath. If they use your tip as Cheat of the Month, you get something extra special, probably a pin badge or something equally amazing. This page is a classic Dr. Kit's Game Clinic from N64 Magazine. It's like a gaming agony aunt section, proper retro stuff. Dr. Kit's is here to sort out your N64 gaming headaches. First up, Matthew from County Antrim is stuck in Donkey Kong 64, bless him. He's found one battle arena pad outside Snide's HQ in DK Isles, and can't find any more. Dr. Kit's, idling playing Minesweeper on his Office PC Classic, actually gives him a full list of locations for the battle arena pads across various levels like Jungle Japes, Angry Aztec, Frantic Factory, Gloomy Galleon, Fungi Forest, Crystal Caverns, Creepy Castle, Hideout Helm and DK Isles itself. Fair play to Dr. Kitts for listing them all out, saves Matthew tearing his hair out. Next, Desiree in London is having trouble with Mystical Ninja 2, trying to get to Creep Village and waiting for the bus. Dr. Kitts tells her she needs to wait all night in the game. Just like real life, huh? She needs to be patient, and the skeleton bus will eventually turn up, either at the end of the day cycle, or when the skeleton bus arrives. Bit cryptic that one. Robert from Malta is struggling with Super Smash Bros. And Yoshi in Bonus Practice 1 can't destroy the targets. Dr. Kitts wolf whistles at a passing nurse. Bit cheeky. He tells Robert it's easier than he thinks, explaining how to use Yoshi's roundhouse kick and ground pound to smash the targets. Make this your last target, he says, so the level ends before Yoshi falls to his death. Helpful tip there. David from Shirley is stuck in Silicon Valley, can't find the keycard in the stinky sewers. Dr. Kitts is dripping with sweat. Bit dramatic. He tells David to grab a rat from the tunnels, go underneath the nearby pipe and kill the fox with exploding poo. Charming. Possess the fox, climb onto a sloped platform, and follow the corridors to an automatic door where the keycard is. Sounds like a right faff, that. Warringtondale. Finally, Fergus from Dorking is struggling to defeat Mr. Clowning Glover. He's even using cheats. Tut tut, Fergus. Dr. Kitts smashes his head on the desk until it breaks. Haha. He's not impressed with the cheating. He explains you just need to throw the ball at 3 targets that appear one after another on the walls and above the door. Once all 3 are hit, a piano drops on the clown's head, killing him outright. Brutal. Warringtondale. At the bottom there's a form to fill in to send your own gaming query, with a picture of Dr. Kitts in a bottle. A bit odd that. It's all addressed to N64 Magazine at their Bath address. Proper old school mail-in stuff back then, before the internet took over everything. This page is all about challenges to keep you busy on your N64, while you're supposedly saving up for Perfect Dark. Cheeky blighters at N64 Magazine suggesting we have nothing to play. It's got 8 challenges to test the best, plastered across the top. Chennai. First up is GoldenEye 007, with a challenge called GoldenEye 06. Bit of a play on words there. They're recommending you crank up the enemy damage to max, like 1000%, and play on 0 agent difficulty. They suggest playing through the jungle, facility, and dam levels with all objectives done and dusted. Sounds properly brutal. Should test your mettle if you fancy yourself a Bond aficionado. Paul. Then there's Super Mario 64, and they've gone for sand-filled pants. Charming title. The challenge is in shifting sandland. You've got to climb to the top of the pyramid, and then slide down, trying to get as many slides in as possible to earn medals. 12 slides for gold, 6 for silver, and 3 for bronze. Tricky stuff to slide perfectly without bailing out early, requires a deft touch on the analog stick, that's for sure. 3. Next is Donkey Kong 64, and Show Off Swordfish. This one's in Gloomy Galleon. Apparently you have to jump over Rule's ship while it steams into harbour, using an en-garde box under the waves as a springboard. You need to approach from the right side of the boat. 5 jumps for gold, 3 for silver, and 2 for bronze medals. Sounds like a bit of timing, and precision jumping is needed there. Lastly, it's Jet Force Gemini, with batty blasting. For this you need to set up a multiplayer target range game. Apparently the challenge is to ignore the ants and bears, and just blast away until you rack up a certain number of shots to get medals. 350 shots for gold, 250 for silver, and 150 for bronze. Bit of a lazy challenge if you ask me, just shooting blindly, but I suppose it's something to do. They even mention some dodgy advertising slogan, kill ants, save bears, for the game. Remember that? A bit naff, wasn't it? So yeah, 4 challenges there, across GoldenEye, Mario, Donkey Kong, and Jet Force Gemini. Something to tide you over, while we all wait impatiently, for Perfect Dark apparently. As if we didn't already know all these little tricks anyway, eh? Still, good of them to suggest it, I suppose. This page of Club 64 is all about challenges for proper N64 games, not like we needed any more excuses to play them back then. First up is Turok 2, Water Way to Go. It's set in the fish in a barrel level, and the challenge is to rack up kills in 10 minutes while swimming about. Medals are handed out for the kill count, 5 for gold, down to 2 for bronze. Classic Turok 2, plenty of gore and underwater action. Then there's Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Demand a Raise. This one is about taking on Ganon, the big pig himself, but without taking any damage. Sounds a bit tough, doesn't it? Medals depend on how much damage you take, or rather, don't take for gold and silver. Taking any damage at all gets you bronze. Good luck with that one, Ganon's a right pain. News? Rogue Squadron gets a look in with Nonna's Lark. It's a time trial on the search for the Nonna level. The trick is, you're not supposed to use the analog stick or buttons while racing towards the cliff. Bit of a weird one. that, but alright. Medals are based on time, with 90 seconds for gold down to 20 for bronze. Finally, GoldenEye 007 has British Bulldog. This is a multiplayer mode on the temple level, with slappers only. Basically, one player in the middle tries to punch everyone else, and once you're punched, you join the Bulldog team. Medals are for how many runs it takes to get everyone. 3 runs for gold, 5 for bronze. Sounds like a laugh with mates, proper playground stuff. Middle. At the bottom there's a Game On section asking for readers to send in their own game challenge ideas, particularly for games like ECW Hardcore Revolution, Donkey Kong 64, Jet Force Gemini, and Resident Evil 2. They're even offering an N64 pin badge for the best ones, fancy that? Send your ideas to their Monmouth Street address in Bath. This page is all about bragging rights, right? I'm the best, it shouts. Bit much, isn't it? We're back with the Star Performance section, this time sponsored by Interact, remember them? They are banging on about the new Tetris on the N64. Apparently this Ben Galt geezer from Leicester has managed some crazy score on it and they're calling it a miracle. Hour and 20 minutes he was at it. Ranked 24 apparently. Spanking. They're also running a high score thing for Super Smash Bros. From the last issue, N64 issue 38. This time it's about bonus 2 minigame, and they want times under 30 seconds. Matthew Sexton from Bedford got the prize last time, but he wasn't good enough apparently. Sarcastic bunch, aren't they? Now they want times for practice 1 with Pikachu, and you could win another joypad. Per year. Then there's the leaderboards for Donkey Kong 64. We have Rambi Bonus, DK Arcade, Jetpack, Onguade Arena, and Diddy's Minecart Ride. Loads of names in there like Tim Booth, Matthew Sexton, he's everywhere isn't he, Reyes, Ben Gooch, Simon Johnson and Ronan O'Rourke cropping up a few times, all battling it out for top scores. Always good to see your name up there, if you were a top player back then. This page is all about Nintendo characters making their way onto the telly, not just stuck on some small portable thing in your bedroom. Mark Green has penned this article about how Nintendo characters are becoming TV stars, basically. It mentions back in the early 90s, ITV, you know, that old channel, had a Legend of Zelda cartoon on Saturday mornings, can you believe it? Zelda on ITV, and apparently, there was even a real-life Mario dancing about on TV screens nationwide. It's talking about how Mario got bigger than Mickey Mouse, and all the TV companies wanted to get in on the action, thinking they could grab some of that Nintendo magic. They were trying to get Nintendo's magic to rub off on their shows, apparently. It even mentions Super Mario Bros. 3, on the NES, a proper classic that one. Still holds up today. The picture shows Mario on a Sony TV, and another Mario character, a 3D render, holding a bow bomb above the word games in the title. A bit over the top for an article about TV, but hey, it grabs your attention, doesn't it? This page is talking about movies based on video games, or featuring them heavily anyway. First up, it's the Super Mario Bros. Movie from '93. This is no game, that was their tagline apparently. They're saying here it was made by the blokes behind Max Headroom and was like Saved by the Bell, which is already a bit dodgy. Apparently the film decided to make the Mario world all dark and gritty, with fireball guns and sproint boots, whatever they are. They liked the wind-up bow bombs and that it stuck to the games in some ways, but didn't like Luigi being a hunk and getting off with Peach. Bob Hoskins was Mario, John Leguizamo was Luigi, and Dennis Hopper was Bowser, directed by Annabelle Jankel. There's a picture of Bowser and his wife. Clearly they didn't get the characters right, did they? Then it's on to The Wizard from '89. This was basically a 2-hour advert for Nintendo. Apparently Universal Studios pitched it to Nintendo. It's got Luke Edwards, Christian Slater, and Fred Savage from the Wonder Years. It's about a kid going to the Nintendo World Championships. They point out it's full of Nintendo stuff, like the Power Glove and Super Mario Bros. 3. They reckon it was a bit evil, all those money schemes and Nintendo wanting trademarks paid for. They liked that Savage from Zelda wasn't sexist for once, a bit romantic even, but didn't like Yamauchi's money stuff and trademarks. The cast listed is Jimmy Woods as Luke Edwards, Corey as Fred Savage, Christine as Wendy Phillips, Nick as Christian Slater, and directed by Todd Holland. There's a picture of Luke Edwards, looking glum, saying he's contemplating a career in unhappy obscurity, cheeky sods, and another picture showing 3 screens of Super Mario Bros. 3. Oh, the excitement, they say sarcastically. There's another photo of kids looking at screens captioned as a defining moment. Righto. Over on the right side, there's a Savage Time interview with Fred Savage about The Wizard. They ask him if he was into games at 11, which he was, mentions NES with Excitebike and Kung Fu. He said starring in a Nintendo film was a dream come true, got to spend the summer playing games and saw advanced copies of Super Mario Bros. 3, making his mates jealous. When asked about watching his performance now, he says it's a rush of emotions, awkward and embarrassing, but reminds him of good times, and that it was a long advert but no regrets. His favourite moments were scenes with Christian Slater and Beau Bridges, and the final scene at the championships. Offset wasn't as fun as on. Apparently all the adults were in casinos and he was too young, so he just went to his room. Finally, they ask if the Wonder Years is coming back, and he says no, happy with how it ended, been in working recently, and happy to do TV shows. Good for him. This page is about TV shows based on Nintendo games back in the late 80s and early 90s, a bit before the N64 days actually. Later. First up there's TV sitcom section, talking about the Super Mario Bros. Super Show from 1989 to 1994. They're saying it was about the Mario brothers in Brooklyn who were always short on rent and would have some celebrity guest popping in, like Cyndi Lauper or Ernie Hudson from Ghostbusters. A bit random really. Apparently there were some odd bits in it, like an alligator and radiator pipes and some dodgy video segments. They liked Mario as a chubby plumber and the Do the Mario dance, but weren't keen on some of the episodes with names like Extra Creepy and Alligator Dundee. Sounds dreadful. They've listed the actors, Lou Albano as Mario, Danny Wells as Luigi Mario and Ernie Hudson as himself, and someone called Subtitles 888 as Director Nintendo, whoever that is. Next section is TV cartoon for Legend of Zelda, from 1989 to 1990, only 13 episodes, thank goodness for that. Apparently it wasn't very good, and they reckon the maths was off. Something about the Triforce having only 2 pieces. They go on about Link acting like a spoiled American high school kid, fancying Zelda and being a bit of a wimp. They liked the weapons like the boomerang and sword from the games, but didn't like an episode where Zelda told Link off for not tidying his room. Riveting stuff. They've got credits again. King Ganon is just a big pig, and Director Talentless is Subtitles 888 again, seems consistent. Link is EXCUUUSEHIM, and Princess Zelda is Irritable, which seems about right if you remember that cartoon. Finally, there's a section called Mario Speaks with Lou Albano, who played Mario in the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. He was a wrestler apparently. He says he got the part after someone heard his voice in another cartoon, Hulk Hogan and Friends. They brought in Danny Wells as Luigi, and got Jeffrey Tambor, who they call the bartender in The Jeffersons, to direct. He mentions he had to shave off his beard for the role. He talks about recording the voice and how the director just said, "Yo, be Mario!" and he went for it with a high-pitched accent. And bang, it worked. He says they shot 65 live and cartoon segments, mostly in LA, and it ran for 5 years, and they're still showing repeats in America. When asked what he's been up to since, he says he starred in Wise Guys and Stay Tuned, wrote a wrestling book, and helped Danny DeVito's acting career after meeting him in a cafe in Brooklyn. Quite the career. This page covers a look back at some old Nintendo tele adverts and videos, mainly from before the N64 days, but it's interesting to see what they were up to back then. First up, there's a review of the Super Mario All-Stars video from '92. Apparently it was supposed to show off the Nintendo seal of quality, but it seems it was a bit of a dud. They reckon it started alright with some fancy graphics, but then went downhill with boring game tips and half-hearted reviews. They even mention Craig Charles, from Red Dwarf, being in it, which sounds a bit random. They didn't rate it much at all, said it was a waste of time, and the video box was lying about having hints for all 4 Mario games. Bit harsh maybe, but they weren't impressed. Then there's a section on the Captain N, the Game Master cartoon from the late 80s, early 90s. This was that cartoon where a kid called Kevin gets sucked into his telly and ends up in Videoland with all sorts of Nintendo characters like Mega Man, Kid Icarus, Simon Belmont from Castlevania and Link and Zelda. They described the plot, sounds a bit bonkers, and they weren't too keen on the fact that Kevin and Princess Lana were always getting a bit too close for comfort. They also mention Mother Brain being voiced by Levi Stubbs from the Four Tops, which is a weird factoid. Next, they talk about the Super Mario cartoon from around the same time, early 90s. This would be the Super Mario Super Show, proper old school stuff. Apparently it was pretty faithful to the games, which is good, and they used the 2D style from the games. They mention the voice actors, Lou Albano and Danny Wells, and say it was all about recreating the Mario world. They talk about Bowser and his cronies causing trouble, and how they borrowed stuff from other cartoons like Popeye. They did have a bit of a moan about Toad's squeaky voice though, saying it was a bit irritating. Finally, there's a section about Nintendo 64 TV adverts, calling it the evolution of Nintendo 64 television advertisements. They go through a few of them. First is the Super Mario 64 feet ad, which was all about a birthday cake with 64 on it. Then there's the Mario Kart 64 feet ad, with the road rage drivers. Sounds a bit odd. For Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, they mention the amazing footage and music, with the tagline, "Willest thou get the girl? Or play like one?" A bit cheesy, but effective I suppose. They also talk about the Jet Force Gemini ad with ants swarming over the Earth, and the Kill Ants, Save Bears line, which was a bit of a weird one at the time. Then the Star Wars Episode 1 Racer advert is mentioned, something about a spaceship controller, and less intelligent owners. Bit of a dig at the gamers there. Lastly, the Donkey Kong 64 feet ad with the plain text and the lines, hairier than a builder's cleavage, and redder than a baboon's bum. Typical Rare humor. Bit crude but memorable, innit? This page is shouting from the rooftops about the upcoming review of Pokemon Stadium. Red hot, it says at the top, like it's breaking news or something, even though we all knew it was coming. It's billing itself as the biggest review you'll ever read, for the pale version, which is fair enough. We were always waiting longer than the US and Japan for these things. They're gonna tell us how it plays, about the transfer pack, remember that fiddly thing, and which Pokemon to use. Right next to it there's a PLS box hinting at Dolphin News, which we all knew was the codename for the GameCube, and news of a new N64 game, all to be revealed next month apparently. Big deal. It also proudly proclaims N64 Magazine as the UK's best-selling independent. Well, it was a decent mag at the time, can't argue with that. Lots of Pokemon art splattered all over. Pikachu looking rather cheerful as usual, and a glimpse of the N64 console below. Standard stuff for the time really. Building hype for a game everyone was already gonna buy anyway. Pokemon, eh? You couldn't move for it back then. This page screams classic N64 magazine, doesn't it? Issue 41, and it's all about Ridge Racer 64. Apparently they've got a massive guide to unlock all the cars once you've nailed the Grand Prix. Looks like they're teasing even more screenshots of Perfect Dark, SR3K, and Turok 3 Oblivion, which were all massive titles at the time. Perfect Dark was the shooter everyone was obsessed with after GoldenEye. SR3K, that Star Road 3000 I assume looked like another racer, and Turok 3 was more dinosaur blasting action. Kiei. Then we've got the reviewed section, featuring Winback, which was a bit of a hidden gem, kind of like a precursor to games like Time Crisis with the cover shooting mechanics, pretty neat at the time. International Track and Field 2000, classic button basher for multiplayer mayhem, always good for a laugh with mates. And Daikatana, oh dear, Daikatana. John Romero's Make You His Bitch game, famously overhyped and underdelivered, a bit of a disaster really, but we were still curious to see what the mag had to say about it. They're also plugging their Skill Club Millennium, which sounds like a tips and cheats section, and they're boasting about special investigations and prizes, typical magazine fare. And it mentions a double game guide plus with Resident Evil 2 and South Park Rally, a bizarre combo if you ask me, but hey, Resident Evil 2 on the N64 was a technical marvel, and South Park Rally was South Park, so bound to be a bit crude and funny. Looking ahead to next month in Planet Game Boy, it seems like they are previewing Tyrannosaurus Rex, Metal Gear Solid on the Game Boy Color, Rainbow Six and Tomb Raider. Metal Gear Solid on the Game Boy Color. Sounds like a very different beast from the PlayStation version, I'm curious about that one. Rainbow Six and Tomb Raider on the Game Boy Color too, they must have been pretty basic versions, but still, impressive for the handheld at the time. Right, this issue is hitting shelves on Thursday, April 13th, 2000. Mark your calendars. This page showcases some of the more, shall we say, unhinged ideas that were thankfully rejected for the Super Smash Bros. Instruction manual. It's looking at characters and stages, weapons, special attacks, special items, and recovery items, all with a decidedly darker and sillier edge. For characters we have Peach, who's apparently ditched baking for punching, and Donkey Kong, who's just your typical angry ape, complete with some rather brutal special moves like arm ripped off at socket. Charming. Their stages are equally bonkers. Peach's Kitchen featuring a 700-pound Semtex cake, and Donkey Kong Zoo, with a zookeeper, in a rather messy state. Remember Smash Bros on the N64 was a laugh, but this is pushing it a bit. Geekogre. Then there are the weapons. Bear Trap, Napalm and a Wet Towel. Napalm for Samus' lovely image. Wet Towel for Mario, bit of a schoolyard bully vibe there. Danger. Special attacks feature the incredibly imaginative Hitting Yourself. That's game design genius right there. The special items are even more out there. Pokeball is suggested as a torture device for Pikachu. And the Jido mind trick, clearly someone's a Star Wars fan, but struggling with spelling and originality. Finally, recovery items are a heart container standard fare, but then a slap-up meal, which is basically a leg of lamb, because nothing says video game recovery like a roast dinner. Overall, it's a good job these ideas stayed on the cutting room floor, though it's a funny look at the kind of crazy brainstorming that must have gone on. Imagine if Smash Bros had actually included napalm and arm ripping. It would have been a very different game, wouldn't it? This page is a blast from the past, an advert from Midway for their Game Boy Color titles, proper retro stuff. You've got Rampage 2, Universal Tour, Marble Madness, Billy Bob's Hunting and Fishing, and Ready 2 Rumble Boxing all there. Afro Thunder from Ready 2 Rumble is front and center, mouthing off like he always did. You can't lose with these titles, but you will lose to M.E. Sucker. Yeah, we heard it all before, mate. To the right, it looks like a section ripped straight from N64 Magazine. Issue 40 from April 2000. Reviews this issue. It says, reeling off Ridge Racer 64, Battlezone, Rise of the Black Dogs, Battle Tanks, Global Assault, Disney's Tarzan, Cyber Tiger Woods Golf, Jeremy McGrath Supercross 2000, and Vigilante 8, Second Offense. Some decent titles there. Ridge Racer 64 was alright for a handheld version, and Vigilante 8 was always a laugh. Then there's other great stuff, which is a bit of a laundry list. The Dolphin Jigsaw, developers speak, sounds a bit dull, but then new Perfect Dark shots and information, now that's more like it. Everyone was gagging for more Perfect Dark back then. 64DD road tested. Whoa, well that was a whole saga, wasn't it, the 64DD? Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion Future Look, International Track and Field Future Look, ECW Hardcore Revolution Playing Guide, Donkey Kong 64 Multiplayer Tips, Toy Story 2, Find All the Secrets, Legend of Zelda, Mask of Majula Preview, Excitebike 64 Preview, Stunt Racer 3000 Preview, and Skill Club Millennium. A right mixed bag to be honest, but Perfect Dark, Turok 3, and Zelda previews would have been the highlights. At the bottom there's a lookout, bit promising, over 45 pages of brand new N64 games. They've got little screenshots showing off SRK3, Battle Tanks, Planet Game Boy, Perfect Dark, and Excitebike 64 with page numbers, trying to tempt you to flick through the mag. Fair play to them.